Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Tenani. Last time, we talked about psychological coercion. A type of psychological coercion called emotional blackmail was explored. The first article described emotional blackmail as a form of manipulation used by those who are close to you and know your vulnerabilities and deepest secrets, but use this information to threaten punishment for not doing what they want. Although they may care about you, they use this intimate knowledge to win your compliance and exploit the fact that you value your relationship with them. Emotional blackmailers can be parents, partners, bosses, co-workers, friends, or lovers, and sometimes even strangers. The four phases of emotional blackmail, the FOG, and the tools of the emotional blackmail trade were reviewed, along with tips on how to deal with emotional blackmailers. TIs don't know most of the people involved in the campaign and don't have a relationship with many of them. The TI has a series of forced, antagonistic interactions with the gang stalkers who also try to use emotional blackmail based on the information gathered about the TI. Next, we talked about hypnosis and reviewed some techniques so that you will be able to know if it's being used on you. Gang stalkers use many forms of psychological coercion during their campaigns, and hypnosis has been reported as one of them. Forensic hypnosis has been used in law enforcement for a long time. There are some caveats to its use, so it isn't accepted as standalone evidence. Then there is conversational hypnosis, where a person can be hypnotized without even knowing it. Some of the methods used to bypass the conscience were reviewed. The methods and descriptions of the conversational hypnosis experience were given to help identify if someone is using it on you. Hypnosis is a powerful tool, but it is far from invincible. However, it is still important that those who practice hypnosis never forget that they are dealing with human beings, not objects. Hypnotists need to follow ethical guidelines and bear the great responsibility that comes with hypnosis. If you can't control yourself, you have no business trying to control someone else. Possible charges for gang stalking were briefly reviewed, followed by news reports about a hypnotist who robbed a store using or misusing his skills. Another hypnotist was accused of using hypnosis to molest and rape a minor for several years. To make a distinction between adult bullies and child bullies, adult bullies will now be referred to as browbeaters. The word bully is too closely tied to playground quarrels where kids get pushed around and taunted. Adult bullying use similar tactics, but there are also differences. The vocabulary word for this episode is browbeater. A browbeater discourages or frightens with threats or a domineering manner. An intimidator. It fits adult bullying and helps make the distinction when talking about office mobs and other adult bullying situations. TIs get browbeaten for the majority of the campaign until the gang stalkers think they can escalate it to physical violence without any repercussions. But there are ways to prevent that, and you can listen to the other episodes to help figure out how. Okay, let's go.
Now it's time for FYI, essential information for TIs. It's unknown who is responsible for the gang stalking networks. TIs have different opinions about which groups, departments, or organizations may be taking part in gang stalking. It helps to have some idea about which group TIs think are active in gang stalking and the general reasons why. You're about to receive some information about this right now.
The government. Many TIs suspect that the government may be involved in gang stalking. This stems from past covert government operations such as the Tuskegee syphilis study and, of course, MKUltra. Let's go through the different government agencies that are mentioned the most. The FBI has come up as a government agency that may be a part of gang stalking. Here is the case of Scott Crow, an activist who found out that he was under FBI surveillance. Let's look at the similarities and differences between what happened to him and what TIs have reported. In an interview with Democracy Now!, he describes his experience. The following comes from FBI to expand domestic surveillance powers as details emerge of its spy campaign targeting activists by Democracy Now!
Amy Goodman. One of those activists is Scott Crow, a self-proclaimed anarchist. He has just learned he was targeted by the FBI from 2001 until at least 2008. Using the Freedom of Information Act, Scott received 440 pages of heavily redacted documents revealing the FBI had traced the license plates of cars parked in front of his home, recorded the arrival and departure of his guests, observed gatherings that he attended at bookstores and cafes. The agency also tracked his emails and phone conversations, picked through his trash to identify his bank and mortgage companies, visited a gun store where he had sought to purchase a rifle for self-defense. Agents monitored also asked the Internal Revenue Service to examine his tax returns and even infiltrated groups he associated with. While Crow has been arrested a dozen times in his years of activism, he has never faced a charge more serious than trespassing. He is among a growing number of people and groups finding themselves on the receiving end of government spying. Well, Scott Crow joins us from Austin, Texas to tell his story. And we're also joined from Washington, D.C. by Mike German, National Security Policy Counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union. He previously served as an FBI agent specializing in domestic counterterrorism from 1988 to 2004. I want to go to Scott Crow to hear a real-life story. Scott, talk about when you first applied under the Freedom of Information Act to get information about whether the FBI was monitoring you. Scott Crow decided to put together a FOIA request for about 30 activists, about 40 organizations, and about 10 events going back to the year 2000 in Austin. We sent it to multiple field offices around the country, and then to see what we'd get back to try to build a picture of what kind of surveillance had been going on if there's other infiltration. And in that, about 50% of the documents that came back with nothing. About 30% came back, people came back with a mention, or a group came back with a mention. And then there was two cases. A case with the woman who organized the showdown in Texas, which was an event in 2003. There was about 400 pages of documents. And then mine was a case where they had years of extensive documentation going on. And that was kind of the impetus of it all. And through that, I was able to find out that, there had been 5 informants in my life. But when we did this, we did it across 9 states, and I found out I was investigated in 9 states for arsons and other criminal acts that I was never charged with. A person who had been a friend of mine and had been on the edge of the activist community within Austin for a number of years, he and I had gone to New Orleans together. And then I ended up co-founding an organization out of those actions. And he worked for a couple of years and left. And then he ended up participating in this case with 2 men, where he possibly entrapped them, but definitely provoked them into doing actions that they would not normally have done. which they ended up going to prison for. And then he came out as an informant, and it turned out he had been investigating a number of us for a number of years. Amy Goodman. So when exactly did you get the documents from the FBI? And talk about the extent that they showed of their surveillance of you. Scott Crow. Well, let me backtrack for a second. I first found out that I was listed as a domestic terrorist in 2006. The FBI, in the way that they ended up dealing with a lot of law enforcement around the country, is they let the local DAs and local law enforcement officers know in different cities. So in 2006, they let the DA in Baton Rouge know, and he let the lawyers know, and the lawyers told me. And that was the first time I ever heard about it, that I was listed as a domestic terrorist and an animal rights extremist. And what it did was it opened up this world of possibilities in this Kafka-esque world, where I am not being formally charged with anything, but all these things are happening. I mean, I could see people sitting in front of my house for years. I mean, all different kinds of cars, and I'm not a paranoid person. I live a very transparent, open glass house, but I could see all these things happening. There was a BOLO that was issued, a B on the lookout report that was issued in 2008 in the Austin Police Department that said I might injure police officers, burn down cars, or incite riots. And the way I knew about it is because people from that city that I had worked with told me that they saw this poster with my picture on it. Now, again, I couldn't do anything about this. Well, finally, in 2010, I got these documents that list me as a domestic terrorist since 2001, and it starts. The picture starts to become clearer on all the things that the FBI has been doing across states, across multiple states, to investigate me and to show dissent, basically among local and regional law enforcement. The infiltration happened over and over again in different groups, in different events. There would be law enforcement and informants and people gathering information at all different levels, city, county, state, and federal authorities, and private securities too. It's a revolving door between that sharing information and all of these things. Going through the trash was a part of it. They investigated me in 9 states, like I said, in 12 field offices. There was 5 informants. There was 1 in Austin, 2 in Houston, 1 in Dallas, and 1 in Detroit. I could only identify 3 of these people. The other ones I can't even identify who they are. People I might have come in contact with over and over again. They sent a letter to the IRS to see if they could get me for tax evasion. And luckily, my partner and I had always had our taxes done because we had owned our own businesses for the longest time. And they found that IRS came back and said they couldn't. There was nothing they could do about it. And there seemed to be a consternation at the FBI about that. They also used closed-circuit television on a house in Dallas that I lived in, and then in Austin, where they put cameras across on poles across the street from my house. The levels that they went to, I think, are unimaginable to most people because it's what you hear about in movies or what people fear the most about it. But pretty much anything that you can think of that they did, except for kicking my door in, happened to me. I was threatened with grand juries, the trash digging, which they did on 2 occasions, on the trash digging, being visited at my work, and visited at my home. You know, Mike German spoke to earlier how they tried to put pressure on people to give information. I was first visited by the FBI in 1999. That was the first time I ever heard the words domestic terrorism and animal rights used together. And also, not only did they try to implicate me in some crimes in Dallas or say that I had or suggest that I had some responsibility for these crimes, then they tried to use that pressure to get me to give information on other people. Amy Goodman. That is a very important question. Mike German, you're with the ACLU. There have been a number of raids. These are the obvious, more obvious manifestations of this. Raids in Chicago and Minneapolis of activists' homes. Can you talk about how wide this surveillance is and what you understand is happening in other parts of the country? Mike German. Sure, I think, like Scott said, we only see the tip of the iceberg. But in 2004, 2005, and 2006, the ACLU issued a number of Freedom of Information Act requests for joint terrorism task force investigations under a number of politically active groups who suspected that they were spied on, the same way Scott did. And we uncovered widespread surveillance of different, peace and justice groups, environmental groups, all kinds of different groups. And you can imagine for a political activist, kind of like Scott recounted, when the FBI is going around telling local officials that this political activist is a terrorist, that cripples their ability to be effective in their advocacy. And it creates a huge chilling effect that affects not just the people under investigation, but others active on those political issues, and even further, people who want to be active but feel it's not worth it to come under that kind of surveillance. Amy Goodman. Do you even know, Scott, right now, if you're being monitored? Scott Crow. I assume that I am because my documents ended in 2008. They said that was all that there was. And just to clarify, they gave me 500 pages of 1,200 pages, so there's still 700 pages more to get. We're going to sue to try to get the rest of them and try to get the redactions taken away so we can see what was going on. But my biggest thing is not to tell people not to be afraid, because everything that people fear I have had happen to me, and I am still okay. I don't mean that in a cavalier way, because it's been definitely traumatizing at different points. But if we don't come out and be open about this, then they've already won. And the surveillance and the war on terror wins against us.
So let's go through the similarities. The interview included this statement, quote, participating in this case with 2 men where he possibly entrapped them, but definitely provoked them into doing actions that they would not normally have done, which they ended up going to prison for. And then he came out as an informant, and it turned out he had been investigating a number of us for a number of years, unquote. reported that their personal lives have been infiltrated by gang stalkers, or their established relationships, friends, mates, families, co-workers, etc., have been compromised or ruined. These false or compromised relationships are then used to incriminate or destroy the TI. A TI is often set up by the people who enter their life under false pretenses, or when those who are already in their lives are turned against them. The interview included this statement, quote, "I mean, I could see people sitting out in front of my house for years. I mean, all different kinds of cars, and I am not a paranoid person. I live a very transparent, open glass house, but I could see all these things happening. The picture starts to become clearer on all the things that the FBI has been doing across multiple states, to investigate me and to sow dissent basically amongst local and regional law enforcement." Unquote. TIs have faced vehicular harassment and reported being followed by different cars across states and cities. They have also reported that law enforcement workers either have participated in the campaign or have been biased against them. Gang stalkers sow dissent against the TI among the communities in which the TI enters. The interview included this statement, quote, "The infiltration happened over and over again in different groups, in different events. There would be law enforcement and informants and people gathering information at all different levels, city, county, state, and federal authorities, and private security too. It's a revolving door between that sharing information and all of these things. Going through the trash was part of it. Well, they investigated me in 9 states, like I said, in 12 field offices. There was 5 informants. There was 1 in Austin, 2 in Houston, 1 in Dallas, and 1 in Detroit. I could only identify 3 of these people. The other ones, I can't even identify who they are. People I might have come in contact with over and over again." Unquote. TIs have reported repeat incidents such as these, as well as the disclosure and dissemination of their personal information across these same levels and locations, among others. Some TIs have also reported gang stalkers going through their trash. There was a report of gang stalkers collecting a TI's trash over several months and then dropping it all on the doorstep to let the TI know that they had been collecting the trash. The TI is followed by different gang stalkers who usually identify themselves as gang stalkers, although some who are trying to get information from the TI may not identify themselves right away. But the similarity is that some gang stalkers might be people that the TI may run into over and over again. The interview included this statement, quote, "They sent a letter to the IRS to see if they could get me for tax evasion, and luckily my partner and I had always had our taxes done because we had owned our own businesses for the longest time. And they found the IRS came back and said they couldn't. There was nothing they could do about it." Unquote. Gang stalkers who are government officials or pose as government officials try to get the TI's private information, even from government agencies. If there is no gang stalkers working within the department who may have access to the information, then the gang stalkers may use illegal or indirect methods to gather information about the TI. The interview included this statement, quote, "They also used closed-circuit television on a house in Dallas that I lived in, and then in Austin, where they put cameras on poles across the street from my house. The levels that they went to, I think, are unimaginable to most people, because it's what you hear about in movies or what people fear the most about it. But pretty much anything that you can think of that they did, except for kicking my door in, happened to me. I was threatened with grand juries, the trash digging, which they did on 2 occasions on the trash digging, being visited at my work and visited at my home. You know, Mike German spoke to earlier how they tried to put pressure on people to give information." Unquote. The TI is under constant surveillance. The cameras, however, may not only be on the outside of the house, but also inside the house. TIs have reported voyeurism on the part of gang stalkers who go to great lengths to let the TI know that they are watching the TI's every move. TIs have faced the same kinds of threats, workplace harassment, and harassment within their home and neighborhoods. As mentioned before, the TI's friends, families, co-workers, neighbors, and others may be pressured to join the campaign or give information about the TI. The interview included this statement, quote, "And you can imagine, for a political activist, kind of like Scott recounted, when the FBI is going around telling local officials that this political activist is a terrorist, that cripples their ability to be effective in their advocacy. And it creates a huge chilling effect that affects not just the people under investigation, but others active on those political issues. And even further, people who want to be active, but feel it's not worth it to come under that kind of surveillance." Unquote. Misinformation and defamation are part of the gang stalking campaign. The things done during the campaign are meant to silence the TI and those who would support the TI. It's obvious now that there is validity in many of the TI's claims. Keep in mind that if government organizations can do these things, so can copycat groups. Let's review some differences. The interview included this statement, quote, "So in 2006, they let the DA in Baton Rouge know, and he let the lawyers know, and the lawyer told me. And that was the first time I ever heard about it, that I was listed as a domestic terrorist and an animal rights extremist. And the way I knew about it is because people from the city that I had worked with told me that they saw this poster with my picture on it. Well, finally, in 2010, I get these documents that list me as a domestic terrorist since 2001, and it starts." Unquote. TIs usually aren't directly informed that they are a TI or placed on a list to be targeted. Usually people involved in the campaign don't tell the TI directly about the campaign or activities in the campaign. Crow mentioned that the FBI visited him earlier. It is rare in a gang stalking campaign for a direct and open interaction or interrogation to happen between the gang stalkers and the TI. It is usually veiled communications or directed conversation. The stalking is usually revealed through a series of odd and disturbing events. The gang stalkers don't approach the TI and say, "Hi, I'm Jane Gang Stalker, and you have been put on the list for a multi-stalking campaign. I'll be taking part in that campaign and need to ask you a few questions." Joe gang stalkers won't say that either. Gang stalkers can be considered domestic terrorists because of their activities. This gang stalking network could be called the American Al-Qaeda. The only difference is that in the Middle East, bombings have become the common terror method, but here, the domestic terrorists do everything but use bombs. One of the goals of this network is to drive their targets to violence. There isn't much difference between the workplace and school shootings instigated by this network and the suicide bombings used by the terrorists abroad. Both result in the destruction and death of innocent people. There are differences between activists who fight for the rights and liberties of others and gang stalkers engaged in purely terrorizing activities against innocent people. Terrorism and activism are both tools to bring about political or social change, but one is more destructive than the other. Activists usually engage in progressive activities that benefit society and make the world a better place. Gang stalkers and activists are not the same thing. It appears that Crow didn't know that he was under surveillance until he got the documents from the FBI. He suspected he was, but didn't really know for sure. Whereas gang stalkers want TIs to know that they are being stalked and are under constant surveillance. The only uncertainty is in the beginning when the gang stalkers are information gathering, but then they do all they can to let TI know about the campaign. It also doesn't appear that Crow was isolated from friends and family agencies like the TIs are. The interview included this statement, quote, "I was first visited by the FBI in 1999. That was the first time I ever heard the words domestic terrorism and animal rights used together. And also, not only did they try to implicate me in some crimes in Dallas or say that I had or suggest that I had some responsibility for those crimes, then they tried to use the pressure to get me to give information on other people." Unquote. TIs are usually the sole targets in the campaign and aren't pressured to give information about others. A TI is mainly pressured to give information about him or herself. The interview included this statement, quote, "There have been a number of raids. These are the obvious, more obvious manifestations of this. Raids in Chicago and Minneapolis of activist homes. Sure, I think like Scott said, we only see the tip of the iceberg, but in 2004, 2005, and 2006, the ACLU issued a number of Freedom of Information Act requests for Joint Terrorism Task Force investigations against a number of politically active groups who suspected that they were spied on the same way Scott did. And we uncovered widespread surveillance of different, peace and justice groups, environmental groups, all kinds of different groups." Unquote. This mentions that the FBI targeted groups. In gang stalking, usually an individual is targeted and isolated. TIs need to be careful because gang stalkers are so deceptive. It is possible that there is no FBI involvement. It is possible that the FBI could be involved. It is also possible that there is a subset of the FBI that are involved in gang stalking and not the whole department. As investigations, information, and evidence are gathered, it will be more clear what is really going on. Next up is the CIA, which is on the list mainly because of the infamous MK Ultra experiments. Here is a bit about MK Ultra. The following comes from Project MK Ultra by Wikipedia.
Project MK Ultra, or simply MK Ultra, was the codename for a covert CIA human experimentation program run by the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence. This official U.S. government program began in the early 1950s, continued at least through the late 1960s, and used U.S. and Canadian citizens as its test subjects. The published evidence indicates that Project MK Ultra involved the use of many methodologies to manipulate individual mental states and alter brain functions, including the surreptitious administration of drugs and other chemicals, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, as well as various forms of torture. Project MK Ultra was first brought to wide public attention in 1975 by the U.S. Congress through investigations by the Church Committee and by the Presidential Commission known as the Rockefeller Commission. Investigative efforts were hampered by the fact that the CIA director ordered all MK Ultra files destroyed in 1973. The Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission investigations relied on the sworn testimony of direct participants and on the relatively small number of documents that survived the CIA director's destruction order. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered a cache of 20,000 documents relating to Project MK Ultra, which led to Senate hearings later that same year. In recent times, most information regarding MK Ultra has been officially declassified. Although the CIA insists that MK Ultra type experiments have been abandoned, a 14-year CIA veteran has stated in various interviews that the CIA routinely conducts disinformation campaigns and that CIA mind control research continued. In a 1977 interview, he specifically called the CIA claim that MKUltra was abandoned a cover story. On the Senate floor in 1977, a senator said the deputy director of the CIA revealed that over 30 universities and institutions were involved in an extensive testing and experimentation program, which included covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native American and foreign. Several of these tests involved the administration of LSD to unwitting subjects in social situations. At least one death resulted from these activities. The agency itself acknowledged that these tests made little scientific sense. The agents doing the monitoring were not qualified scientific observers.
These descriptions are also similar to what TIs have reported. The targeting of diverse groups of people by a diverse group of people. The no consent experimentation. The use of hypnosis. The use of unqualified scientific observers. And the manipulation of mental states. The differences are that there is no mention of street theater, character assassination, sabotage of employment, and financial circumstances, among other things. As with the FBI, it could be the whole CIA department, a subset, or none of the department takes part in gang stalking. Last but not least on the government suspects is the military. The military has a division called the Psychological Operations, or PSYOPs. Here is an incident that occurred with the PSYOPs division. The following comes from Another Runaway General. Army deploys PSYOPs on U.S. senators by Michael Hastings.
The U.S. Army illegally ordered a team of soldiers specializing in psychological operations to manipulate visiting American senators into providing more troops and funding for the war, Rolling Stones has learned, and when an officer tried to stop the operation, he was railroaded by military investigators. The orders came from the command of Lieutenant General William Caldwell, a three-star general in charge of training Afghan troops, the linchpin of U.S. strategy in the war. Over a 4-month period last year, a military cell devoted to what is known as information operations at Camp Eggers in Kabul was repeatedly pressured to target visiting senators and other VIPs who met with Caldwell. When the unit resisted the order, arguing that it violated U.S. laws prohibiting the use of propaganda against American citizens, it was subjected to a campaign of retaliation. My job in PSYOPs is to play with people's heads, to get the enemy to behave the way we want them to behave, says Lieutenant Colonel Michael Holmes, the leader of the IO unit, who received an official reprimand after bucking orders. I'm prohibited from doing that to our own people. When you ask me to try to use these skills on senators and congressmen, you're crossing a line. The list of targeted visitors was long. According to the interviews with members of the IO team and internal documents obtained by Rolling Stone. Those singled out in the campaign included Senators John McCain, Joe Lieberman, Jack Reed, Al Franken, and Carl Levin. Rep. Steve Israel of the House Appropriations Committee, Admiral Mike Mullen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Czech ambassador to Afghanistan, the German Interior Minister, and a host of influential think tank analysts. The incident offers an indication of just how desperate the U.S. command in Afghanistan is to spin American civilian leaders into supporting an increasingly unpopular war. According to the Defense Department's own definition, PsyOps, the use of propaganda and psychological tactics to influence emotions and behaviors, are supposed to be used exclusively on hostile foreign groups. Federal law forbids the military from practicing PsyOps on Americans, and each defense authorization bill comes with a propaganda rider that also prohibits such manipulation. Everyone in the PsyOps, Intel, and IO community knows you're not supposed to target Americans, says a veteran member of another PsyOps team who has run operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's what you learn on day one. When Holmes and his four-man team arrived in Afghanistan in November 2009, their mission was to assess the effects of U.S. propaganda on the Taliban and the local Afghan population. But the following month, Holmes began receiving orders from Caldwell's staff to direct his expertise on a new target, visiting Americans. At first, the orders were administered verbally. According to Holmes, who attended at least a dozen meetings with Caldwell to discuss the operation, the general wanted the IO unit to do the kind of seemingly innocuous work usually delegated to the 24 members of his public affairs staff, compiling detailed profiles of the VIPs, including their voting record, their likes and dislikes, and their hot-button issues. In one email to Holmes, Caldwell's staff also wanted to know how to shape the general's presentation to the visiting dignitaries and how best to refine our messaging. Congressional delegations, known in military jargon as COTELs, are no strangers to spin. U.S. lawmakers routinely take trips to the front lines in Iraq and Afghanistan, where they receive carefully orchestrated briefings and visit local markets before posing for souvenir photos in helmets and flak jackets. Informally, the trips are a way for generals to lobby congressmen and provide first-hand updates on the war. But what Caldwell was looking for was more than the usual background briefings on senators. According to Holmes, the general wanted the IO team to provide a deeper analysis of pressure points we could use to leverage delegation for more funds. The general's chief of staff also asked Holmes how Caldwell could secretly manipulate U.S. lawmakers without their knowledge. "How do we get these guys to give us more people?" he demanded. "What do I have to plant inside their heads?" According to experts on intelligence policy, asking a PsyOps team to direct its expertise against visiting dignitaries would be like the president asking the CIA to put together background dossiers on congressional opponents. Holmes was even expected to sit in on Caldwell's meetings with the senators and take notes without divulging his background. Putting your propaganda people in a room with senators doesn't look good, says a leading military analyst. It doesn't pass the smell test. Any decent propaganda operator would tell you that. At a minimum, the use of the IO team against U.S. senators was a misuse of vital resources designed to combat the enemy. It cost American taxpayers roughly $6 million to deploy Holmes and his team in Afghanistan for a year. But Caldwell seemed more eager to advance his own career than to defeat the Taliban. "We called it Operation Fourth Star," says Holmes. Caldwell seemed far more focused on the Americans and the funding stream than he was on the Afghans. We were there to teach and train the Afghans, but for the first 4 months, it was all about the U.S. Later, he even started talking about targeting the NATO populations. At one point, according to Holmes, Caldwell wanted to break up the IO teams and give each general on his staff their own personal spokesperson with PsyOps training. It wasn't the first time that Caldwell had tried to tear down the wall that has historically separated public affairs and PsyOps, the distinction the military is supposed to maintain between informing and influencing. After a stint as the top U.S. spokesperson in Iraq, the general pushed aggressively to expand the military's use of information operations. During his time as a commander at Fort Leavenworth, Caldwell argued for exploiting new technologies like blogging and Wikipedia, a move that would widen the military's ability to influence the public, both foreign and domestic. According to sources close to the general, he also tried to rewrite the official doctrine on information operations, though that effort ultimately failed. In recent months, the Pentagon has quietly dropped the nefarious-sounding moniker PsyOps in favor of the more neutral MISO, short for Military Information Support Operations. Under duress, Holmes and his team provided Caldwell with background assessments on the visiting senators and helped prep the general for his high-profile encounters. But according to members of his unit, Holmes did his best to resist the orders. Holmes believed that using his team to target American civilians violated the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948, which was passed by Congress to prevent the State Department from using Soviet-style propaganda techniques on U.S. citizens. But when Holmes brought his concern to Colonel Gregory Brezel, the spokesperson for the Afghan training mission run by Caldwell, the discussion ended in a screaming match. "It's not illegal if I say it isn't," Holmes recalls Brezel shouting. In March 2010, Brezel issued a written order that directly tasked Holmes to conduct an IO campaign against all DV visits, short for Distinguished Visitor. The team was also instructed to prepare the context and develop the prep package for each visit. In case the order wasn't clear enough, Brezel added that the new instructions were to take priority over all other duties. Instead of fighting the Taliban, Holmes and his team were now responsible for using their training to win the hearts and minds of John McCain and Al Franken. On March 23rd, Holmes emailed the JAG lawyer who handled information operations, saying that the order made him nervous. The lawyer, Captain John Scott, agreed with Holmes. "The short answer is that IO doesn't do that," Scott replied in an email. "Public affairs works on the hearts and minds of our own citizens, and IO works on the hearts and minds of the citizens of other nations." While the twain do occasionally intersect, such intersections, like violent contact during a soccer game, should be unintentional. In another email, Scott advised Holmes to seek his own defense counsel. "Using IO to influence our own folks is a bad idea," the lawyer wrote, and contrary to IO policy. In a statement to Rolling Stone, a spokesman for Caldwell categorically denies the assertion that the command used an information operations cell to influence distinguished visitors. But after Scott offered his legal opinion, the order was rewritten to stipulate that the IO unit should only use publicly available records to create profiles of U.S. visitors. Based on the narrower definition of the order, Holmes and his team believed the incident was behind them. 3 weeks after the exchange, however, Holmes learned that he was the subject of an investigation called an AR-15-6. The investigation had been ordered by Colonel Joe Bush, Caldwell's chief of staff. The 22-page report obtained by Rolling Stone reads like something put together by Kenneth Starr. The investigator accuses Holmes of going off base in civilian clothes without permission, improperly using his position to start a private business, consuming alcohol, using Facebook too much, and having an inappropriate relationship with one of his subordinates, Major Thurl Levine. The investigator also noted a joking comment that Holmes made on his Facebook wall in response to a jibe about Afghan men wanting to hold his hand. "Hey, I've been here almost 5 months now," Holmes wrote. "Give me a break. A man has needs, you know." LTC Holmes' comment about his sexual needs, the report concluded, are even more distasteful in light of his status as a married man. Both Holmes and Levine maintained that there was nothing inappropriate about their relationship and said that they were waiting until after they left Afghanistan to start their own business. They and other members of the team also say that they had been given permission to go off post in civilian clothes. As for Facebook, Caldwell's command had aggressively encouraged its officers to use the site as part of a social networking initiative, and Holmes ranked only 15th among the biggest users. Nor was Holmes the only one who wrote silly things online. Colonel Breezel's Facebook page, for example, is spotted with similar kinds of nonsense, including multiple references to drinking alcohol and a photo of a warning inside a Porto John mocking Afghans. In case any of you forgot that you are supposed to sit on the toilet and not stand on it and squat. It's a safety issue. We don't want you to fall in or miss your target. Breezel now serves as the Joint Chiefs of Staff, where he works in the office dedicated to waging a global information war for the Pentagon. Following the investigation, both Holmes and Levine were formally reprimanded. Holmes, believing that he was being targeted for questioning the legality of waging an IO campaign against U.S. visitors, complained to the Defense Department's Inspector General. 3 months later, he was informed that he was not entitled to protection as a whistleblower because the JAG lawyer he consulted was not designated to receive such communications. Levine, who has a spotless record and 19 service awards after 16 years in the military, including a tour of duty in Kuwait and Iraq, fears that she has become the collateral damage in the military's effort to retaliate against Holmes. "It will probably end my career," she says. "My father was an officer, and I believed officers would never act like this. I was devastated. I've lost my faith in the military, and I couldn't, in good conscience, recommend anyone joining right now." After being reprimanded, Holmes and his team were essentially ignored for the rest of their tours in Afghanistan. But on June 15, the entire Afghan training mission received a surprising memo from Colonel Bush Caldwell's chief of staff. Effective immediately, the memo read, "The engagement engagement in information operations by personnel assigned to the NATO training mission Afghanistan and Combined Security Transition Command Afghanistan is strictly prohibited. From now on, the memo added, the Information Operations Cell would be referred to as the Information Engagement Cell. The IE's mission: this cell will engage in activities for the sole purpose of informing and educating U.S., Afghan, and international audiences. The memo declared, in short, that those who had trained in PSYOPs and other forms of propaganda would now officially be working as public relation experts, targeting a worldwide audience. As for the operations targeting U.S. senators, there is no way to tell what, if any, influence it had on American policy. What is clear is that in January 2011, Caldwell's command asked the Obama administration for another $2 billion to train an additional 70,000 Afghan troops, an initiative that will already cost U.S. taxpayers more than $11 billion this year. Among the biggest boosters in Washington to give Caldwell the additional money, Senator Carl Levine, one of the senators whom Holmes had been ordered to target.
Let's go through the similarities. The article included this statement, quote, "The general wanted the IO unit to do the kind of seemingly innocuous work usually delegated to the 24 members of his public affairs staff, compiling detailed profiles of the VIPs, including their voting records, their likes and dislikes, and their hot-button issues. The general wanted the IO team to provide a deeper analysis of pressure points we could use to leverage the delegation for more funds. The general's chief of staff also asked Holmes how Caldwell could secretly manipulate the U.S. lawmakers without their knowledge. How do we get these guys to give us more people? He demanded. What do I have to plant inside their head? Holmes was even expected to sit in on Caldwell's meetings with the senators and take notes without divulging his background." Unquote. The TIs face the same kind of information gathering. The gang stalkers especially seek the TI's hot buttons in order to manipulate the TI into violent behavior, suicide, or induce insanity. They do this seemingly innocuous work through direct or indirect conversations with the TI and try to get close to TI, not revealing their true intentions, of course. They use the information as leverage against the TI in an attempt to enter the TI's life instead of standing on the outside looking in. The gang stalkers then try to plant ideas of violence, suicide, mental illness, and other harmful things into the TI's head. They usually do this while pretending to be decent people. The article included this statement, quote, "Levine, who has a spotless record and 19 service awards after 16 years in the military, including a tour of duty in Kuwait and Iraq, fears that she has become the collateral damage in the military's effort to retaliate against Holmes. It will probably end my career," she says. "My father was an officer, and I believed officers would never act like this. I was devastated. I lost my faith in the military, and I couldn't, in good conscience, recommend anyone joining right now." Unquote. The TI's family, including kids, friends, and others who could be supportive of the TI, also become collateral damage in the campaign against the TI. It is important to understand the reach of one gang stalking campaign. A war is being waged by a network of ruthless people against one person. These perps will use anything and anyone to get to the TI and cause damage. Wherever the TI goes, the gang stalkers follow, manipulating and deceiving others to use in the campaign. Though the TI is the target, she or he isn't the only person impacted in the campaign. The campaign has a wide effect and a huge impact on society as a whole. How? What is happening has been happening in small towns and inner cities for years. It involves an alarming level of lawlessness that provides an oasis for criminal activity. It all begs the questions: what is it all for? Why would this group spend so much time, money, and resources targeting a diverse group of innocent individuals? Are they going to keep targeting individuals, or is this practice for the ultimate goal, society as a whole? The article included this statement, quote, 3 months later, he was informed that he was not entitled to protection as a whistleblower because the JAG lawyer he consulted was not designated to receive such communications. Unquote. It would seem that the person who exposed this misuse of PSYOP tactics, especially against fellow Americans, would be praised. But unfortunately, he faced many forms of retaliation. He was just following the rules and guidelines that were taught to him, as the article said, since day one. He was even refused protection as a whistleblower, even though that is essentially what he was. Some people become TIs because they are whistleblowers. In addition, TIs are forced into the gang stalkers bubble and face retaliation when they try to report the gang stalking and get out. The differences are that the reason for the targeting was clear, whereas in some TI cases, it isn't clear. Another difference is that more than one person was targeted at the same time, whereas in a TI's case, unless it's someone close to the TI, such as a relative or mate, that is supportive, the TI is usually the only one targeted. The most glaring difference is that Holmes was able to receive some assistance with the issue. TIs usually find it difficult to get assistance because the gang stalkers trap them and make sure that fellow gang stalkers take the case even when TIs seek assistance. Gang stalkers lock the TI, or try to lock the TI, into the gang stalkers bubble and make it difficult for them to reach the rest of the world. As said before, the whole, a subset, or none of the military could be involved in gang stalking. Speaking of whistleblowers, the next on the list are corporations. Again, some TIs become targets because they were whistleblowers. They claim that the company or corporations that they worked for retaliated against them by nominating them for a gang stalking campaign. In the following excerpts, please focus on the claims made by the insurance agents about the stalking more than anything else. The following comes from Stalked by Allstate. Being an agent for the giant insurer can be tough, even terrifying. An extraordinary war between a company and its own troops is only getting fiercer. By Richard Bahar, Reporter Associates Jane Firth and Tricia Welsh.
I strongly believe the only way this will turn out correctly, where the truth will come out and there will be a beneficial conclusion for all parties concerned, is if the CEO takes one day out of his busy schedule to personally meet with some of these agents and offer them protection to tell the truth. I asked nicely. I gave plenty of time even though my life is in danger. Letter from Allstate agent Miles Vargas to the CEO, November 1993. Vargas made a trip to Dallas yesterday and is on the move again this morning. The surveillance lost him for a while in traffic and had to set up on his apartment and office in hopes of relocating him. The intelligence that has been picked up is that Vargas may be headed to the state insurance department in Austin. Instructions were given to stay on him. Allstate Corporate Security Internal Memo, December 1993. Miles Barkis had become one of Allstate's top-selling salesmen, the best in the 550-agent Dallas region by his 29th birthday in 1993. Working 7-day weeks, he had amassed 3,200 customer accounts, nearly twice the company average. Allstate, headquartered in Northbrook, Illinois, showered Barkis with awards and honors and free exotic vacations that he never had time to accept. Then one day, Barkis's world exploded. Deeply disturbed that his superiors were ordering agents to break the state law that protected consumers from discrimination, he began to blow the whistle. Though the company never admitted doing anything wrong, Barkis's evidence resulted in Allstate paying what was then the largest insurance fine in Texas history. But Barkis paid too. He was stalked and chased by private eyes for periods spanning 6 months, according to internal company documents. And with the flick of a computer switch, Allstate took away all his business. Consider also the case of another agent who has spent her life savings of $200,000 to keep an Allstate office afloat in rural Georgia. She is called a neighborhood office agent, NOA, a title shared by roughly 80% of the sales force. That means she is an Allstate employee, unlike Barkis, who was, at least on paper, an independent contractor. Even so, when she started in 1989, her manager told her to expect to break even in a few months and to earn a six-figure income by 1991, provided she plowed her own bucks into the company's business, money she had saved from 20 years of working at Sears Roebuck, Allstate's former parent. She received awards and accolades from Allstate for her performance, but internal documents suggest she was doomed to fail. A cash flow analysis done for her benefits by Allstate in 1991, when she was supposed to have reached six-figure pay, predicted she would have to invest as much as $100,000 just to run the office and pay herself a small salary for the next 3 years. When Allstate refused to give her a copy of the analysis, claiming it was inaccurate, she began pleading and complaining to her superiors. When that got her nowhere, she began filing lawsuits and organizing agents around the country to do the same. Last year, she and other witnesses began to observe strange vehicles staking out her office. Police traced one of them, a silver van with smoked windows and a Florida license plate, to a surveillance agency that says it handles only insurance-related investigations for Allstate and other companies. Such are two skirmishes in Allstate's continuing war with its agents, featuring private eyes, high-speed chases, nasty lawsuits, and threats of violence. It is one of the ugliest worker management face-offs in a major U.S. company, and it is only getting worse. While the company insists relations with its agents are excellent, war is not too strong a term for the situation. A senior Allstate executive has used it internally to characterize the relationship. How bad is it? Confidential employee opinion surveys reveal that nearly two-thirds of employees are not confident the company tells them the straight story. The surveys were conducted on 4 occasions since early 1994 with consistent results within Allstate's personal property and casualty unit, which generates nearly 80% of the corporation's sales. Earlier this year, agents secretly helped a Wall Street Journal reporter expose an issue they had been trying to get management to acknowledge for years, that training seminars linked to the notorious Church of Scientology were widespread in Allstate during the late 1980s and early 1990s. In Florida, agents are attempting to unionize. In New York, some struggling agents filed a class action racketeering suit against Sears. A judge dismissed it in March, and the agents are appealing. More troubling for Allstate is a class action lawsuit in California where upwards of 3,000 agents are seeking to recover tens of millions of dollars in unreimbursed costs. Allstate may be vulnerable because California is one of few states where labor laws call for indemnification of an employee's expenses and losses. While many agents are financially successful, many others are barely hanging on. In recent years, many agents have filed personal lawsuits against Allstate, resulting in sealed settlements. In June, Arizona Supreme Court admonished Allstate for tactics against a former agent that in the long run can only serve to cause disrespect and other harm to the civil justice system. It urged Allstate to focus on the merits of cases rather than try to trip its opponents with technicalities. Various Allstaters believe they have been stalked simply because they are whistleblowers, litigants, or highly paid employees whose managers they claim have harassed them into involuntary retirement in order to take their businesses away. The company wholly and vehemently denies that it stalks or harasses agents. We do not do surveillance, says an assistant vice president for legal affairs. People make mistakes once in a while around here, but people do not do that kind of thing. It's suggestive of an invasion of people's privacy where there would generally be no real reason for it. He acknowledges that Allstate authorized the surveillance of Miles Barkis, but says that is the only time in his 17-year career such a thing has happened to his knowledge. Yet, a former security officer in a sworn deposition 2 years ago referred to surveillance as standard operating procedure that Allstate utilizes if it's required. The assistant vice president for legal affairs also dismisses the notion that Allstate has serious problems with its agents, arguing instead that a small, disgruntled minority are whipping up conspiracy theories. It's a tough industry, and I suspect some people are going to struggle and some people are going to fail, he points out. Do we have agents out there who are unhappy with the company? Absolutely. How many? I don't know. But the relationship between the company and its agency force is absolutely outstanding. In recent years, more than 1,600 agents have formed a national club, not a labor union, they insist, a club that Allstate quietly monitors but refuses to communicate with. Some of its leaders have been harassed, even terminated, for dubious reasons, such as misfiling a handful of insurance applications. At a recent convention in Atlanta, not one member of the group, the National Neighborhood Office Agent Club, NNOAC, was willing to be quoted in Fortune. One of the club's most eloquent leaders, a successful 33-year Allstate veteran, edits a newsletter that calls for the ouster of senior executives whom he considers crooks and cowards. He says he arrived at his home in Virginia one day last March to find his .22 caliber handgun, which he hadn't used for more than a decade, lying on his dresser. The gun's chamber had 4 spent cartridges. In his closet, a row of pants had bullet holes through their backsides. He believes the shooting incident is related to his activities on behalf of the NNOAC, that somebody was trying to scare him into silence. But he has no proof, and Allstate denies any involvement. He refers to the past 10 years at Allstate as a decade of deceit, and writes that if the good hands people are to prevail in the struggle, then those responsible for the turmoil, the deceit, and deception must depart. Those corporate executives who feel they are above the law in pursuit of the bottom line are liabilities. They constitute a clear and present danger to all employees of the company and to the insuring public. The NNOAC is the group to which a senior executive drafted the letter urging cooperation and peace. But in the letter's final draft, the CEO and his colleagues watered down the language dramatically, removing all references to things like storms and wars and healing and urgency. Inaccurate, hyperbole in their view. At that point in time, we were a newly public company, explains an Allstate lawyer. So for securities reasons, for a lot of different reasons, the choice of wording is very delicate. In the end, it didn't matter. The CEO wound up deep-sixing the peace talks altogether. Allstate has developed a new concept, the neighborhood exclusive agent, which requires employees to pay 100% of their expenses in return for higher commissions and the opportunity to own their customer accounts after 5 years. Most agents aren't buying. For one thing, NEAs can be terminated at any time without cause, and any part of their contract can be changed. Only 10% of agents are NEAs, but it's clearly the wave of the future since new hires are given no choice. Miles Barkis of Dallas is one of those agents who like the sound of the NEA deal. Intensely driven, he was hired as an NOA in 1988, built a staff of 5, and plowed most of his income back into the business. He willingly became an NEA in 1992, but soon concluded Allstate wasn't living up to its end of the bargain. A private letter ruling from the IRS states that for Allstate to obtain certain tax breaks, NEAs must be free to run their agencies with no direction from Allstate. Yet Barkis was still being required to attend meetings, meet sales quotas, and submit his staff to sales training sessions. He began to complain. The final straw for Barkis came when he realized that agents were being required to discriminate against people with spotless driving records in violation of Texas law. For instance, the law clearly stated that single people or people with prior insurance could not be denied standard rates on that basis. Allstate, in heavy cost-cutting mode and apparently believing such people represented higher risks, tried to skirt the law by accepting only customers who owned 2 cars. When the state nixed that loophole, Allstate created another. It excluded people who lived in apartment buildings without covered parking garages. Customers they did accept were placed in the highest risk bracket available, paying double what others paid for the same insurance. Allstate decided that it would cheat to beat its competitors. Barkis says, they are crooks because they broke the law and cowards because they couldn't admit it. If everyone just worked together honestly, we could have destroyed the competition. In early November 1993, Barkis decided to lodge a formal complaint against his regional managers through Allstate's We Care program, which supposedly assures whistleblowers confidentiality. Yet 3 days after the complaint was made, says Barkis, he received a call warning him that a supervisor was on his way over and would break down the door if necessary. Barkis refused to let him in. Several days later, Barkis says he received an anonymous death threat on the telephone and began noticing people following him. Overwhelmed by fear, Barkis warned an Allstate manager that anyone comes through the plane of my door, they get shot. On November 16th, he had a security system installed in his home. The man who installed the alarm, a former police officer, saw that Barkis was in such a panicky state that he moved the Allstate agent into his own home in a rural town 80 miles from Dallas. For several weeks, Barkis, believing his life was in danger, barely slept and rarely walked outside the ex-cop's house, which was surrounded by private investigators hired by Allstate. The company placed Barkis under 24-hour surveillance for several periods spanning 6 months, November 1993 to April 1994, at a cost of at least $145,000, according to internal records. Midway through that period, the agent's computers were suddenly turned off, while his customers received letters stating that Barkis had retired. Some letters said he had terminated his employment. Allstate insists that the stalking and the agent's ultimate termination were justified by Barkis' shooting threat and a range of peculiar behavior defined by the insurer as the following: suddenly abandoning his job and customers, leaving rambling voicemail messages on the answering machines of top executives, and refusing to deal with anyone at headquarters except for then CEO, who received garbled, incoherent letters from the agents at his office and home. Allstate also says it hired a psychiatrist to analyze Barkis' letters just to make sure he wasn't dropping bombs in airline packages or anything, according to an Allstate lawyer. He only wanted to talk to the CEO. Barkis didn't abandon his job as Allstate suggests. While being stalked, he kept his office door locked and referred new customers to other agents. His staff continued to service existing customers. And though his letters to the CEO are occasionally wobbly, they complain articulately about the surveillance and the violations of Texas law. I'm not proud of the letters, said Barkis. I was in a terrorized state of mind, but I wanted to make sure that the CEO couldn't pass the buck. Allstate claims it was particularly rattled when Barkis called headquarters to announce that a package of materials would be sent to the CEO's home around Thanksgiving. But the package contained only audio tape proving the agents were breaking the law, plus a copy of a book called How to Succeed in Business Without Lying, Cheating, or Stealing. Allstate psychiatrists concluded a week later that Barkis posed no danger to any employee except perhaps to himself. Yet the surveillance continued on and off until the following April. Miles was scared to death, says the ex-cop who took the agent into his home. There's no way Miles was going to hurt anybody. I was going to teach him how to shoot, and he was so uptight about it, he wouldn't even hold a pistol. Everybody who has insurance paid for that surveillance. Allstate shouldn't have done it. When Barkis flew to Austin to visit state insurance regulators, 2 Allstate private investigators were on the same American Airlines flight. On another occasion, he drove nearly 3 hours to see the regulators, tailed by 3 investigators at speeds reaching 100 miles per hour, according to Allstate's own surveillance reports. Still, the surveillance continued night and day. When Barkis used his cellular phone, his calls were apparently monitored by a scanning device. A second Allstate agent who furnished Barkis with documents was followed. So was an employee of Barkis's as she drove from work to pick up her son at his school. After 30 minutes of being stalked, she finally lost the tail by pulling into the parking lot of a police station. I was panicked, she recalls. I don't think Allstate deserved to do that to anybody. Echoes Barkis, I can't even fathom having billions of dollars at my disposal and following women. My only consolation is that God will get them. Backed into a corner, Barkis began to work with a Dallas TV reporter. The frenetic energy he had poured into his sales career would now be applied towards exposing his bosses. The agent went undercover in 10 cities, carrying a hidden camera in a shoulder bag and posing as a prospective customer. At every stop, agents refused to insure him for a multitude of illegal reasons. For being single, for owning 1 car, for declining to buy more than 1 policy, for having been insured previously by a high-risk carrier, and so on. The TV expose, which aired across Texas in early 1994, prompted what was then the largest insurance fine in Texas history. Though at just $850,000. It equaled about 6 hours of Allstate's earnings and was a painful lesson for future whistleblowers. The undercover operation was the impetus to the fine, says an attorney with the Texas Department of Insurance. It was because of Miles' work. We owe him a lot. Allstate flatly broke the law, and they thought they could get away with it. Allstate agreed to pay the fine without conceding guilt. The company then canceled its advertising with the TV station and sent a letter to policyholders promising to eliminate any lingering misconceptions among its agents about what the rules were. But while the letter suggests agents were skirting the law on their own, company memos clearly show that Allstate directed them to do so. Allstate's surveillance of Barkus is itself under investigation by the Texas Board of Private Investigators, a state agency. One reason is that Barkus's credit report was pulled on 3 occasions by 2 companies that have since been linked to a group of Dallas private investigators. When the companies could not justify pulling the reports, their relationship with a major credit agency was terminated. It is a violation of federal law for credit reports to be obtained for improper purposes. All state officials say they are not aware of any reason why Barkus's credit reports would have been gathered. Barkus is suing Allstate and believes he is still being harassed. He entered a parking lot in April to discover that all 4 of his car doors were wide open, yet no valuables had been removed. Later, he nearly lost a wheel while driving down a highway. The lug nuts had all been loosened, according to a Honda repairman. Barkus says he and his father received repeated hang-up calls at their homes. Shortly after a conversation with this magazine in August, Barkus says he experienced 20 straight hang-ups, followed by an egg splattered against his front door. Allstate says all surveillance activities against Barkus ceased in the spring of 1994. Other agents feel sure they have been stalked by the company despite its denials. A former Arizona agent believes he was a target in 1987. He was an enormously successful award-winning salesman, earning upwards of $200,000 a year. Then one day, investigators began visiting and grilling his customers. When he called his managers to find out what was happening, nobody would talk to me, or they'd say they didn't know what I was talking about. One day, a manager tailed the agent in his car all the way to a customer's house. Next, he observed a car going back and forth repeatedly in front of his own home. He slept on a couch with a baseball bat. Why would he be harassed? Last year, in a tape-recorded statement for an unrelated lawsuit, a former high-ranking manager admitted that he was targeted for termination because he was highly compensated. The ex-manager also stated that the ex-manager was ordered to fly to an operations center in Texas to pull 100 of the agent's customer applications and find some dirt that could be used to get rid of him. The scheme apparently worked. The agent suffered a nervous breakdown and was briefly hospitalized and never returned to Allstate. I was the white buffalo, he says today. And when you gun down the top buffalo, you can then go after the rest of them, or at least get the rest of the agents scared enough to jump through hoops. He says that the ex-manager, racked by guilt, visited him 6 years later to apologize. The ex-manager refuses to comment, but in his 1994 statement, he described the company's culture in the following way. It was like a big fraternal system. I mean, you either played the game their way by their rules, or you got dealt a bad hand, or you got eliminated from the game. It's just the way it worked. A former Nevada agent had a similar experience. The agent has a box in his home stacked with 24 trophies and plaques from Allstate. A 3-inch thick loose leaf binder is filled with letters from management dated 1976 through 1991, praising the agent for his performance. His 3,000 customers provide him with an annual income of $150,000. He was a very good agent, recalls his former immediate manager, who now works for Metropolitan Life. When he worked for me, he produced, he wrote good quality, he was profitable, and he retained a lot of his business. But the agent had infuriated a number of higher-ups. When the company issued an underwriting guideline, he would verify its legality with insurance regulators. Treasonous behavior at a place like Allstate. He was even threatening to steer customers to regulators when he felt they were improperly rejected by Allstate's underwriting department. An internal document in 1989 states that he either needs to join the program or get out of the way. Payback time began several months after his manager left Allstate in 1991. He says a new manager began to target him, over-scrutinizing his work, soliciting customer complaints, and cutting him off from communicating with a major claim center. He was also subjected to a massive corporate security probe and repeated audits. To protect himself, the agent secretly tape-recorded more than 700 of his conversations with colleagues. In early 1992, he sued the company and went on stress leave. He never returned. Meanwhile, Allstate created a 12-page single-spaced job in jeopardy report. Virtually every petty disagreement with a customer was transformed by management into a career-threatening violation by the agent, whether he was involved in the incident or not. Observes an ex-manager, I thought it was unusual that in a short period of time they had written the agent up. I had absolutely no complaints about him. Allstate denies that the agent was placed under surveillance, but family members and neighbors strongly dispute that. His cousin, an Army officer, claims he himself was stalked while living at the agent's house in 1992. The agent's daughter, then 15, filed a police report in November 1992 claiming she was followed to school. She says for years she suffered from nightmares. I would dream that men were taking away my little sister. She says today, after I was followed, I wouldn't go anywhere by myself, like to the bathroom in a restaurant or to the mall. The agent says he continues to be plagued in his sleep. I still have nightmares of Allstate management coming after me, he says. I was one of their biggest producers in the state, and I couldn't understand what was happening. After viewing a videotape deposition of an Allstate security officer in 1993, the agent's daughter insisted he was one of her stalkers. So did a neighbor who provided a sworn statement to that effect. He put a newspaper in front of his face, but I was close enough to see exactly who he was, she recalls. There's no doubt in my mind. I worked in a bank years ago, and we were told how to observe people. The security officer, who has since died, admitted to investigating the agent, but denied conducting any physical surveillance. Allstate says the security officer was dying of cancer at the time of the deposition and was thus unrecognizable from the videotape. He was a mere shadow of himself, said an Allstate lawyer. He was a skeleton. Two of the agent's lawyers claim they were placed under surveillance by Allstate earlier this year. One says that during the month-long trial in Reno, she was regularly stalked, was subjected to repeated hang-up calls in the middle of the night, and even had wooden nails wedged into one of her tires, causing a slow leak. She slept with a snub-nosed .38 caliber pistol by her side. During the day, she kept an assistant in her hotel room to guard her files and computer. In one instance, she says a white truck followed her to an automatic bank teller where she parked and climbed out of her car. The truck stopped on the far side of the lot where a man donning a cap and sunglasses climbed out and began talking on a cellular phone. She immediately jumped back into her car and raced to her hotel, the white truck in hot pursuit. I don't know whether they were trying to get into my room or just make me uneasy, she says. Maybe they were hoping I would stay awake at night, unable to sleep. In another instance, says the lawyer, she was stalked on a snowy Friday night on the long, mountainous drive from Reno to her home in California. For having the nerve to sue them, I have been followed and I have been harassed, she says, adding that she's worried it could happen again. I have a family of 5 and I don't want to be harassed by them anymore. Allstate vehemently denies stalking or harassing any of the agent's lawyers. It flabbergasts me that 5 months after the trial, I'm now first hearing that they thought we had them under surveillance, says an Allstate attorney. I was there for most of the trial. If they really believed that Allstate was surveilling them, why would they not have called me? Or why didn't they run to the Nevada police and complain? Responds the lawyer. Would he have done anything about it to assist us? Did they do anything about it when the agent complained about the surveillance? Instead, what they did was make a motion to suppress the evidence so that it would never be brought before the jury. Though much of the acrimony at Allstate has involved NOAs, the best cost-sharing agents instituted 10 years ago, not all of it has. Nearly 1,300 Allstate agents have refused to convert to NOA entrepreneurship. They work in Sears stores or company-owned offices where all their overhead is paid for, but many of them complain of harassment for failing to convert. One such agent of Central Florida has worked for 18 years for Allstate. He and his 2 partners claim that in recent years they have suffered continuous audits and verbal abuse from managers. For failing to become an NOA, the agent is not permitted to purchase Yellow Pages display ads, which help draw customers. And yet, catch-22, he is threatened with termination for not meeting production quotas. Earlier this year, he decided he had had enough. He filed several discrimination complaints with the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Allstate was alerted to the complaints in April. A month later, he noticed a strange-looking car, low to the ground, tinted windows, 2 antennas, passing outside his home. 90 minutes later, he hopped into his pickup truck to run an errand. Suddenly, after 2 blocks, the odd car was following him. He pulled into the shopping center and entered a store to buy aspirin. When he got back behind the wheel, he soon spotted his stalker making a swift turn from a vacant corner of the lot. Allstate denies putting a tail on him. It also denies it ordered the surveillance of the Georgia agent who was stalked by a silver van that police traced to an insurance-related investigative outfit that has done work for the company. At the same time, she had been organizing fellow agents into a RICO suit against Sears. Encouraged by 6-figure promises, she herself has sunk more than $200,000 into her Allstate agency since she began in 1989. She's apparently doing okay, says an Allstate attorney. She's still there, but just barely. She has exhausted her life savings while failing to earn the minimum wage, has laid off her office staff, and is facing eviction because she cannot afford the office rent. Given what's taken place over the past 10 years at Allstate, it's little wonder that so many agents are bitter. Their cynicism is fueled by superiors who try to tell them what opinions they should hold when they complete their confidential surveys. If you can mark your survey as overall satisfied, all things considered, it will reinforce your own attitude positively and add to your success, wrote Allstate's top New York official in a letter to employees last year. Marking your survey not satisfied overall is to perpetuate and aggravate a false and destructive perception that nothing good yet is possible. Many employees who answered their surveys positively were given a free day off. Allstate's top regional official in Dallas wrote a similar note to his employees. Many of you feel we, the management team, are not giving you the straight story, he observed. He then instructed underlings who could not answer their opinion surveys in a positive way to call him directly on a special screen story hotline.
This story is from 1995. Gang stalking was reported at that time and much earlier too. Since this article was written at a time when Allstate was undergoing huge changes, the issues may have been worked out by now. So this is not about Allstate's past challenges. This article serves simply as a case study where the focus is on the similarities and differences between the former insurance agent's experiences with stalking and that reported by the TIs. Let's go through the similarities. The article included these statements, quote, various Allstaters believe they have been stalked simply because they are whistleblowers, litigants, or highly paid employees whose managers, they claim, have harassed them into involuntary retirement in order to take their businesses away. But the agent had infuriated a number of higher-ups. Why would he be harassed? Last year, in a tape-recorded statement for an unrelated lawsuit, a former high-ranking manager admitted that he was targeted for termination because he was highly compensated. He says a manager began to target him over scrutinizing his work, soliciting customer complaints, and cutting him off from communicating with a major claims center. Virtually every petty disagreement with a customer was transformed by management into a career-threatening violation by the agent, whether he was involved in the incident or not. Unquote. The gang stalkers could select a target for any reason, real or imagined, superficial or substantial. Among other things, a bad breakup, messy divorce, fights between children, disagreements, tense collaboration, or friend turned enemy can suddenly turn anyone into a target. Gang stalkers get the inside scoop, but like any other gang or organized crime network, they are subjected to the leader's whims and restricted by the group's activities, so gang stalkers aren't even safe from becoming a TI. If they have a falling out with the group, they too can become a target. Anyone can become a target for any reason. Similar to the insurance agent's experience, even being a good coworker can cause a person to be targeted. Some reasons include jealousy from a malicious coworker, being a tenured employee, or a high earner that the employer wants to get rid of. To all non-gang stalkers, please be careful when dating, forming friendships, partnerships, and overall who you let into your life. These gang stalkers are ruthless, vicious, and malicious. They seem to enjoy torturing and tormenting other people. Gang stalkers are not the type of people you want to get involved with in any way. A bad breakup, or even a relationship where the non-gang stalker wants to end the relationship but the gang stalker doesn't, can lead to a campaign. Since law enforcement is not investigating gang stalking at the moment, it is even harder to tell if your potential mate, business partner, friend, co-worker, or whatever is involved in these activities. Gang stalkers lead double lives and know how to behave like decent or even nice people. The more you learn about gang stalking, the better able you will be to protect, prevent, and or neutralize a gang stalker's attempts. The article included these statements, quote, "He was stalked and chased by private eyes for periods spanning 6 months, according to internal company documents, and with the flick of a computer switch, Allstate took away his business." The ex-manager also stated that he, the ex-manager, was ordered to fly to an operations center in Texas to pull 100 of the agent's customer applications and find some dirt that could be used to get rid of him. He says a manager began to target him over scrutinizing his work, soliciting customer complaints, and cutting him off from communicating with a major claim center. Virtually all petty disagreements with a customer was transformed by management into a career-threatening violation by the agent, whether he was involved in the incident or not. Unquote. Financial devastation, career sabotage, and office mobbing are other things that are similar between the TI and the insurance agents. The gang stalkers want to get the TI in a place where the TI is needy and dependent. It is really twisted, diabolical, and just plain insane. The gang stalkers try to ruin the TI's life and ruin the TI's financial situation. Then they surround the TI, and some pretend they want to help the TI, while others try to take advantage of the TI situation, while some are just plain cruel. However, they all desire to use the TI in some way. It's forcing the TI into a slave-like situation where the masters are the gang stalkers. The campaigns are expensive, but some of the costs are offset by the misuse of public tax money. But that's a different topic. It's important that the audience knows that the campaigns are not isolated between the gang stalking network and the TIs. The public is inadvertently helping to fund campaigns against TIs. This includes the TI turning to public assistance because the gang stalkers sabotage job-seeking or job-keeping efforts, and also public servants who are gang stalkers using public resources to aid the sadistic campaigns. The article included these statements, quote, "Allstate insists that the stalking and the agent's ultimate termination were justified by Barkis's shooting threat and a range of peculiar behavior defined by the insurer as the following: suddenly abandoning his job and customers, leaving rambling voicemail messages on the answer machines of top executives, and refusing to deal with anyone at headquarters except for then CEO, who received garbled, incoherent letters from the agent at his office and home." Allstate also says it hired a psychiatrist to analyze Barkis's letters just to make sure he wasn't dropping bombs in airline packages or anything. And though his letters to the CEO are occasionally wobbly, they complain articulately about the surveillance and the violations of Texas law. "I'm not proud of the letters," says Barkis. "I was in a terrorized state of mind, but I wanted to make sure that the CEO couldn't pass the buck." Unquote. The gang stalkers usually claim that there is something wrong with the TI after tormenting the TI into a terrorized state of mind. This is part of the effort to discredit the TI so that others won't believe his or her claims. Notice that in an effort to make it official, a psychiatrist was hired to try to make a diagnosis that the insurance agent was mentally ill. Notice too that the stalking and termination was all blamed on the insurance agent. It was made to appear that the insurance agent was the threat and the harmful one, not the other way around. Gang stalkers do the same thing to the TI. They harass and torment the TI, but make it seem as if the TI is the one who is dangerous. They get off on fooling the audience in this way, so as not to blow their cover. The article included these statements, quote, "When Barkis flew to Austin to visit state insurance regulators, two Allstate private investigators were on the same American Airlines flight. On another occasion, he drove nearly 3 hours to see the regulators, tailed by 3 investigators at speeds reaching 100 miles per hour, according to Allstate's own surveillance reports. Still, the surveillance continued night and day. When Barkis used his cellular phone, his calls were apparently monitored by a scanning device. A second Allstate agent who furnished Barkis with documents was followed. So was an employee of Barkis's as she drove from work to pick up her son at his school. After 30 minutes of being stalked, she finally lost the tail by pulling into the parking lot of a police station. I was panicked," she recalls. One reason is that Barkis's credit report was pulled on 3 occasions by 2 companies that have since been linked to a group of Dallas private investigators. He entered a parking lot in April to discover that all 4 of his car doors were wide open, yet no valuables had been removed. He experienced 20 straight hang-ups followed by an egg splattered against his front door. Then one day, investigators began visiting and grilling his customers. When he called his manager to find out what was happening, nobody would talk to me, or they'd say they didn't know what I was talking about. One day, a manager tailed the agent in his car all the way to a customer's house. Next, he observed a car going back and forth repeatedly in front of his own home. In one instance, she says a white truck followed her to an automatic bank teller where she parked and climbed out of her car. The truck stopped on the far side of the lot where a man donning a cap and sunglasses climbed out and began talking on a cellular phone. She immediately jumped back into her car and raced to her hotel, the white truck in hot pursuit. I don't know whether they were trying to get into my room or just make me uneasy, she says. Maybe they were hoping I would stay awake at night, unable to sleep. A month later, he noticed a strange-looking car, low to the ground, tinted windows, 2 antennas, passing outside his home. 90 minutes later, he hopped into his pickup truck to run an errand. Suddenly, after 2 blocks, the odd car was following him. He pulled into a shopping center and entered a store to buy aspirin. When he got back behind the wheel, he soon spotted his stalker making a swift turn from a vacant corner of the lot. Allstate denies putting a tail on him. Unquote. These statements are similar or exactly like what TIs have reported. Vehicular harassment is common in gang stalking campaigns. Following the TI on flights, to hotels, or to different locations, phone taps, prying into the TI's personal and financial information are also common in the campaigns. The article included this statement, quote, "The scheme apparently worked. The agent suffered a nervous breakdown, was briefly hospitalized, and never returned to Allstate. I was the white buffalo," he says today. "And when you gun down the top buffalo, you can then go after the rest of them, or at least get the rest of the agents scared enough to jump through hoops." Unquote. The gang stalker's main goals are to get the TI to become violent, insane, or suicidal. As you can see, the tactics used against the insurance agent worked, and it was used to get others to be more subordinate. This is also an illustration of the ripple effect of bullying, where the audience fears the bully after witnessing what was done to the victim. The article included this statement, quote, "The ex-manager refuses to comment, but in his 1994 statement, he described the company's culture in the following way. It was like a big fraternal system. I mean, you either played the game their way by their rules, or you got dealt a bad hand, or you got eliminated from the game. It's just the way it worked." An internal document in 1989 states that he either needs to join the program or get out of the way. Unquote. The purpose was for the insurance agent to get with the program. It is possible that the TI is being forced to get with the program. It's also possible that the gang stalkers eventually want the rest of society who isn't on their program to get with their program so that they don't have to sneak around anymore. It would be a complete disaster and dangerous if the gang stalkers are able to convert the rest of society to their program. The article included this statement, quote, "The company denies that the agent was placed under surveillance, but family members and neighbors strongly dispute that. His cousin, an Army police officer, claims he himself was stalked while living at the agent's house in 1992. The agent's daughter, then 15, filed a police report in November 1992 claiming she was followed to school. She says for years she suffered from nightmares. I would dream that men were taking away my little sister, she says today. After I was followed, I wouldn't go anywhere by myself, like to the bathroom, in a restaurant, or to the mall. The agent says he continues to be plagued in his sleep. I still have nightmares of Allstate management coming after me, he says. I was one of their biggest producers in the state, and I couldn't understand why this was happening." Unquote. The insurance agent's family was also targeted. This is similar to the TIs who report that their kids are harassed and sometimes attacked by adult gang stalkers or the gang stalkers' kids. Let's review the differences. The article included this statement, quote, "He was stalked and chased by private eyes for periods spanning 6 months according to internal company documents." Unquote. This company documented only 6 months of abuse. TIs are usually harassed for years. A gang stalker once told a TI that the campaign lasts a lifetime. Other differences are that the insurance agents weren't isolated from their friends and families. There was no mention of street theater or the use of prompts. There was no report of cameras within the home. Next on the list are hate groups, neighbors, and local law enforcement. The following comes from Interracial Couple Harassed by Neighbors Claim Police Discrimination by Mary Shelton.
Lynette Weaver and Larry Stapleton moved to Hemet hoping to live a peaceful life with their children. Instead, what the interracial couple said they have experienced is an ongoing harassment campaign against them by several of their white neighbors. The couple took their complaints to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department Hemet Station, and instead of receiving assistance, the couple said they received even more harassment from deputies and supervisors assigned to that station. Weaver and Stapleton have been living in their home in Hemet since 2004 with their children. She is white, he is black. Together, they are the only interracial family on their street, but did not have any serious problems where they lived until several neighbors moved onto the street within the past year. Problems, they said, continued even as deputies not only told them there was nothing they could do to help them, but who they claim harassed them. The Sheriff's Department doesn't want to talk to our witnesses, Stapleton says. Not ever. This behavior allegedly increased in intensity after the couple filed citizen complaints against several deputies, which were sent to the department's administrative headquarters in Riverside. The couple had received a letter after filing the complaint that it was being investigated by supervisors working at the same station that staffed the deputies under investigation on the complaint. At one point, Weaver said a deputy had told her that he would find whatever he could to get her. When Weaver complained about this to the captain, she said that he admitted that it happened, but the deputy had taken it a different way. How else could you take it, Weaver said. Now, Weaver sits in jail in Banning, separated from her husband and children, and facing 15 felonies of perjury, offering false evidence, and preparing false records in relation to what she said were temporary restraining orders she had filed against her neighbors. According to Weaver and Stapleton, these individuals had harassed them and used racist slurs in their presence. Several interactions with their neighbors were documented by the couple, including through audio recording. However, the judge who heard Weaver's restraining order case was not interested in listening to or considering any of their evidence. Stapleton said through a phone call last week that Weaver was arrested after deputies showed up at their residence one evening, allegedly because one of their cars was illegally parked in the street. He had asked the deputies who arrived what had happened, and they had said nothing, and Weaver was told to put his hand behind his back by the deputies. He was taken away by deputies. Stapleton's teenage son was also arrested for allegedly making a terrorist threat and taken to the Southwestern County's juvenile facility. The man was impounded by the sheriff's deputies, Stapleton said, leaving him without a viable way to travel from Hammond to the Southwestern Justice Center, where Weaver was arraigned on August 10th. Her bail was set by a judge at $25,000. The Riverside County District Attorney's Office confirmed that a case had been filed against Weaver, but said that no prosecutor had been assigned to the case and probably would not be until the preliminary hearings was held. It is currently scheduled for August 22nd. The office could offer no further information on the case. Attempts to reach the Riverside County Sheriff's Department Hammond Station were unsuccessful. A representative contacted by telephone at the Riverside County Sheriff's Department Administrative Headquarters in Riverside was unable to provide a contact number for the Hammond Station since the transfer of Bernie. In several interviews, the couple related encounters they had with the deputies from the Hammond Station, including several incidents when they had called the station for assistance. In one incident, on May 3rd, the couple said that a neighbor driving a car across the street backed into their own car while their children were inside of it. Weaver said the sheriff's deputy came out but wouldn't help them and told them he didn't believe the neighbor had done it, even though the color of paint on their car matched that of the car that allegedly hit them. However, later that month, when the neighbor said that Stapleton threw a rock at the neighbor's car, the Hammond deputies sent the case to the Riverside County District Attorney's Office, where it was filed as a misdemeanor. An incident occurred, Weaver said, when racial slurs were spray painted on their property. The sergeant came out and said that nothing could be done about it because it was not a crime. Weaver has filed small claims cases against the neighbors and won them. One of the cases, she said, was selected to be taped on the Judge Judy show and is due to be aired in several months. Weaver and Stapleton had received an autograph photograph from the celebrity judge after they had filmed the episode. They believe the neighbors continued to harass them because they were upset about losing the case. Still, the harassment continued, said the couple. In response to the harassment, Weaver said that she had filed several temporary restraining orders on the neighbors. Weaver said that police officers from the Hammond substation continued to harass her and her husband after they came looking for a signature on a proof of service on a temporary restraining order she had filed against her neighbor. They compared signatures by the woman who signed it, and they were similar. But then they went over to Weaver and asked her for her copy. They returned 4 hours later with the document with an additional page attached to it with the word fraud on it. The night after that, a police car showed up in front of her residence and shone a spotlight on it. After her husband went outside, the car reversed and left the streets. Not long after that, Weaver was arrested. The couple has reported these incidents to other agencies, including the State Attorney General's Office and the Department of Justice, they said. Stapleton is frustrated by the experience he and Weaver have gone through as the only interracial couple on their street in Hammond, and he recalled all the deputies, squad cars, and helicopters which had come to his residence the night they took Weaver away. All this to arrest a girl on false charges, Stapleton said. It just makes no sense.
This article has so many similarities to what TIs have reported. It shows how different groups, in this case neighbors, hate groups, and law enforcement, can join together to target a person or a family. This story is an almost perfect example of some of the things that happens in most TI cases. So let's go over the differences. One difference is that TIs are a diverse group of people, and targeting isn't based solely on ethnicity, at least not in most cases. The second is that the couple was able to get some assistance with the issues. There was no mention of street theater, the use of prompts, or cameras within the home. I would like to add another group to the list: human traffickers. It is possible that gang stalking is linked to other crimes such as human trafficking. The methods used to terrorize victims of human trafficking have remarkable similarities to the experiences reported by TIs. Please see the video Similarities Between Gang Stalking and Human Trafficking on Protect Life Now's YouTube channel for more information. Some other suspected groups are cults, copycat civilian groups, Satanists, pagans, Illuminati, religious organizations, neighborhood watch programs, and others. There is also speculation that this may be the notorious secret society. While it's uncertain if this is the secret society at work, it is definite that this network is a psycho society. In conclusion, it could be all of these, some of these, one of these, or none of these groups. When gang stalking is exposed, it will become clearer who is behind it. If you have essential information for TIs, please email protectlifenow@yahoo.com. Now it's time for a commercial break.
Has business been slow? Do you want to attract more customers to your establishment? Hire a TI entourage. If hiring a celebrity is too expensive for your budget, a TI may be a more affordable option. Let me explain. Businesses sometimes hire celebrities to make an appearance at their stores, party, clubs, etc. in order to draw more crowds. The TI entourage works the same way. When a TI makes an appearance at your event or business, gang stalkers will follow in tow. You are guaranteed either more customers making purchases or knowing that your business exists. We will work with you to capitalize on the influx of gang stalkers in order to increase your visibility and repeat visits. The gang stalkers are a diverse group of all incomes, including high-income households. That's right, households. So whether you need kids, teens, college students, professionals, seniors, or even entire families, hire a TI entourage to make an appearance and watch the increase in the amount of traffic in and around your business. Call today and get a free red cap and our booklet on how to keep your parking lot U-turn ready. Call 1-800-4PSYCHOS. That's 1-800-4PSYCHOS. Call now. TIs, it's time to know thy enemy.
So how do you get a group of people to commit this horrendous crime? Start with groupthink. The following comes from Groupthink by Wikipedia.
Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within groups of people. It is the mode of thinking that happens when the desire for harmony in a decision-making group overrides a realistic appraisal of alternatives. Group members try to minimize conflict and reach a consensus decision without critical evaluation of alternative ideas or viewpoints. Antecedent factors such as group cohesiveness, structural faults, and situational context play into the likelihood of whether or not groupthink will impact the decision-making process. The primary socially negative cost of groupthink is the loss of individual creativity, uniqueness, and independent thinking. Symptoms. To make groupthink testable, Irving Janis devised 8 symptoms indicative of groupthink. Type 1. Overestimations of the group, its power, and morality. 1. Illusions of invulnerability, creating excessive optimism and encouraging risk-taking. 2. Unquestioned belief in the morality of the group, causing members to ignore the consequences of their actions. Type 2. Closed-mindedness. 1. Rationalizing warnings that might challenge the group's assumptions. 2. Stereotyping those who are opposed to the group as weak, evil, biased, spiteful, impotent, or stupid. Type 3. Pressures toward uniformity. 1. Self-censorship of ideas that deviate from the apparent group consensus. 2. Illusions of unanimity among group members. Silence is viewed as agreement. 3. Direct pressure to conform placed on any member who questions the group, couched in terms of disloyalty. 4. Mind guards, self-appointed members who shield the group from dissenting information.
TIs have noticed these symptoms in the gang stalking network. Some TIs have tried to talk or rationalize with the gang stalkers, but it was like talking to a wall. The gang stalkers are so entrenched in groupthink, they can't see past their own 2 feet, unless, of course, they get a text message instructing them to do so. Gang stalkers definitely have the illusion of invulnerability, which they try to force on the TI. When this crime gets exposed, some gang stalkers will pretend to be sorry, but let's make it clear right now that most of these people enjoy engaging in this crime and the perceived privilege that they get from it. Make no doubt about it. They wear their gang stalking status as a badge of honor in front of those who are in on the secret. They are aware that the rest of society will probably frown upon their activities, but the covert aspects and getting over on the system pleases them, so don't be surprised if you see crocodile tears from gang stalkers once they are held accountable for their actions. Society has to be very careful with these people and deal with them the same way they would deal with serial killers. These are highly organized serial bullies and serial harassers and will continue to do so as long as they are allowed or think they can get away with it. Unquestioned belief in the morality of the group causes members to ignore the consequences of their actions. It's not clear why these people do this, and there may be many reasons, but they don't believe they will ever get caught. Most criminals don't. That's what gives them the go-ahead. The gang stalkers stereotype the TI. It could range from the common stereotypes to ones that are specifically fabricated by the puppet master. The gang stalkers live in this bubble that is predominantly devoid of reality. They have a keen awareness of what is going on around them, but they are told how to view it. The fantasy world they live in is similar to that of those who grew up in violent inner city neighborhoods, narrow-minded small towns, exclusive neighborhoods, and abusive homes. This is not to say that all small towns or exclusive neighborhoods are narrow-minded, or that all inner city neighborhoods are violent, though there is a lot of trauma in the ones that are. Some of these people, regardless of socioeconomic background, don't venture out into the rest of the world and will only seek out things that confirm their dogma. There's nothing wrong with having a set of strongly held principles as long as they are beneficial not only to others but also to yourself. These gang stalkers live in a dog-eat-dog bubble where everything and everyone is controlled by whoever manipulates their way to the top. Okay, so many people may think, well, that's society as a whole. No, it's not. If it were, we wouldn't exist. No society that is like that can survive and will implode. Kind of like what is happening now, because there is no check on the psychopathic ideals that are popular and erodes the good principles that have supported our growth and progress. This is not about going to church or religion, but there needs to be a return to morality and ethics. It's not about, let's say, a wealthy, good person overlooking the countless crimes committed by an unrepentant and proud gangbanger and befriending that person anyway. It's not about an impoverished person being blindly obedient to a crooked, wealthy VIP just because of that person's VIP status. In the real world, good, bad, smart, dumb, and the in-betweens come in every shape, size, colors, and from all different backgrounds or neighborhoods. Those who are stuck in groupthink miss that. They believe only what they are told. Most stereotypes are limited and have expiration dates. What used to be true about a certain group or person may not be true anymore. A definition of stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. The key words are fixed and oversimplified. For example, it is observed that a certain group of people eat grapefruits a lot. If someone is preparing a meal for this group, they may include grapefruits to be more accommodating. There's nothing wrong with that. The stereotyping comes in when the host includes the grapefruits, but the group doesn't want to eat grapefruits that day. If the host insists or gets upset that the group doesn't want to eat grapefruit, that's stereotyping. A fixed idea. They must want grapefruit and will be happy that I have it. Oversimplification. They eat grapefruit a lot. They may eat it because it's the fruit that is widely available in their area, not necessarily the one that they like the most. Or maybe it is believed to fight off a certain illness, so it's become a staple food, not necessarily the one they will always choose. So if they don't feel the need for the nutrient, or other foods are available, they shouldn't have grapefruit forced down their throat by someone holding that stereotype. There is nothing wrong with noticing a pattern of behavior, but it shouldn't become fixed and or oversimplified. In groupthink, pressures towards uniformity make self-censorship become the norm. Groupthink is also known as herd mentality, and in most herds, there is a leader or a group of leaders, and everyone else just follows whatever those in charge say. It works in the jungle. It keeps the herd alive with a few casualties. But humans are different from other animals in that we have a bigger effect on our environment. Herd mentality and groupthink may keep the group alive with a few casualties, but it stays within the primitive mindset where little to no progress is made because it's all about survival. The jungle dynamics don't change much. The herd goes out to feed, gets attacked by predators, runs, and then returns home. The predators stalk the prey, attack, avoid becoming prey, and return home. Groupthink erodes the majority of the group's humanity. They become zombies just following orders from other people who probably are no smarter or better than them, but have manipulated the followers into believing that they are. Most of the followers continue to live only on a survival instincts and never really get a chance to live or enjoy the experience of being human. Being human is not just about surviving. It's experiencing all the beautiful and good things that are available to everyone and using natural human capabilities to progress towards something better. Self-censorship in groupthink denies people of that right. Groupthink is a destructive form of collaboration that is not about progress, but mainly about apparent group consensus at all cost. Unfortunately, those steeped in groupthink believe that silence means agreement. Here's why this is so twisted. Along with self-censorship, there is direct pressure to conform on any member who questions the group, and the mind guards are on patrol. So, when asked if anyone disagrees with a leader or leader's ideas, the room falls silent. Why? Because the dissenters have been silenced, and in a completely absurd logic, the group leaders believe the silence means agreement. That's why it's called an illusion of unanimity. So, that's groupthink in a nutshell. Let's see how it plays out in practice. The following comes from All Together Now by Barbara Ehrenreich.
Their faces long with disapproval, the anchors announced that the reason for the war had finally been uncovered by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and it was groupthink, not to mention collective groupthink. It sounds so kinky and un-American, like something that might go on in a North Korean stadium. But supposedly intelligent, morally upstanding people had been indulging in it right in Langley, Virginia. This is a surprise. Groupthink has become as American as apple pie and prisoner abuse. In fact, it's hard to find any thinking these days that doesn't qualify for the prefix group. Our standardized test-driven schools reward the right answer, not the unsettling question. Our corporate culture prides itself on individualism, but it's the team player with the big smile who gets to be Employee of the Month. In our political culture, the most crushing rebuke is to call someone out of step with the American people. Zip your lips is the universal message, and get with the program. This summer's remake of The Stepford Wives doesn't have anything coherent to say about gender politics. Men are the oppressors, women are the oppressors. But it does play to the fantasy, more widespread than I'd realized, that if you were to rip off the face of the person sitting in the next cubicle, you'd find nothing but circuit boards underneath. I traced the current outbreak of droid-like conformity to the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when groupthink became the official substitute for patriotism, and we began to run out of surfaces for affixing American flags. Bill Meyer lost his job for pointing out that whatever else they were, the 9/11 terrorists weren't cowards, prompting Ari Fleischer to warn, though he has since backed down, that Americans need to watch what they say. Never mind that Sun Tzu says somewhere in his oeuvre that while it's soothing to underestimate the enemy, it's often fatal too. And what was that group thinking in Abu Ghraib? Yes, the accused guards seem to have been encouraged to soften up their charges for interrogation, just as the operatives at the Langley were pelted with White House demands for some plausible casus belli. But the alarming thing is how few soldiers demurred and how many got caught up in the fun of it. Societies throughout history have recognized the hazards of groupthink and made arrangements to guard against it. The shaman, the wise woman, and similar figures all represent institutionalized outlets for alternative points of view. In the European carnival tradition, a king of fools were permitted to mock the authorities at least for a day or two. In some cultures, people resorted to vision quest or hallucinogens, anything to get out of the box. Because while the capacity for groupthink is an enduring part of our legacy as social animals, it's also a common precondition for self-destruction. 1,000 coalition soldiers have died because the CIA was so eager to go along with the emperor's delusion that he was actually wearing clothes. Instead of honoring groupthink resistors, we subject them to insult and abuse. Sergeant Samuel Province III has been shunned by fellow soldiers since speaking out against the torture of Abu Ghraib, in addition to losing his security clearance and being faced with a possible court-martial. A fellow Abu Ghraib whistleblower, Specialist Joseph Darby, was praised by the brass, but has had to move to an undisclosed location to avoid grassroots retaliation. The list goes on. Sybil Edmonds lost her job at the FBI for complaining about mistranslation of terror-related documents from the Arabic. Jesselyn Raddick was driven out of her post at the Justice Department for objecting to the treatment of John Walker Lind, then harassed by John Ashcroft's enforcers at her next job. As Fred Alford, a political scientist who studies the fate of whistleblowers, puts it, we need to understand in this land of the free and home of the brave that most people are scared to death. About 50% of all whistleblowers lose their jobs. About half of those lose their homes, and half of those people lose their families. This nation was not founded by habitual groupthinkers, but it stands a fair chance of being destroyed by them.
Enough said. The following excerpts is from a book written during the whole communist affair. You will hear mention of communism, but that is not the main topic. It is to discuss a devastating form of psychological coercion called menticide. First, let's do an overview of the methods used to obtain forced confessions. This has an eerie resemblance to what TIs go through in general. It is a way to force the TI into identifying with the aggressor, ultimately leading to groupthink with the enemy. The following comes from The Rape of the Mind, The Psychology of Thought Control, Menticide, and Brainwashing by Just A. M. Merlu, M.D.
All knowledge can be used either for good or for evil, and psychology is not immune to this general law. Psychology has delivered up to man new means of torture and intrusion into the mind. We must be more and more aware of what these methods and techniques are if we are successfully to fight them. They can often be more painful and mentally more paralyzing than the rack. Strong personalities can tolerate physical agony. Often it serves to increase stubborn resistance. No matter what the constitution of the victim, physical torture finally leads to a protective loss of consciousness. But to withstand mental torture leading to creeping mental breakdown demands an even stronger personality. What we call brainwashing is an elaborate ritual of systematic indoctrination, conversion, and self-accusation used to change non-communists into submissive followers of the party. Menticide is a word coined by me and derived from mens, the mind, and cater, to kill. Both words indicate the same perverted refinement of the rack, putting it on what appears to be a more acceptable level, but it is 1,000 times worse and 1,000 times more useful to the inquisitor. Menticide is an old crime against the human mind and spirit, but systemized anew. It is an organized system of psychological intervention and judicial perversion through which a powerful dictator can imprint his own opportunistic thoughts upon the minds of those he plans to use and destroy. The terrorized victims finally find themselves compelled to express complete conformity to the tyrant's wishes. Through court procedures at which the victim mechanically reels off an inner record which has been prepared by his inquisitors during a preceding period, public opinion is lulled and thrown off guard. A real traitor has been punished, people think. The man has confessed. His confession can be used for propaganda, for the Cold War, to instill fear and terror, to accuse the enemy falsely, or to exercise a constant mental pressure on others. One important result of this procedure is the great confusion it creates in the mind of every observer, friend, or foe. In the end, no one knows how to distinguish truth from falsehood. The totalitarian potentate, in order to break down the minds of men, first needs widespread mental chaos and verbal confusion, because both paralyze his opposition and cause the morale of the enemy to deteriorate unless his adversaries are aware of the dictator's real aim. From then on, he can start to build up his system of conformity. In both the Mind-Stency and the Schwabel cases, we have documented reports of the techniques of menticide as it has been used to break the minds and wills of courageous men. Let us look at the case of Cardinal Mind-Stency, accused of misleading the Hungarian people and collaboration with the enemies, the United States. In his expose on Cardinal Mind-Stency's imprisonment, Stephen K. Swift graphically describes three typical phases in the psychological processing of political prisoners. The first phase is directed towards extorting confession. The victim is bombarded with questions day and night. He is inadequately and irregularly fed. He is allowed almost no rest and remains in the interrogation chamber for hours on end while his inquisitors take turns with him. Hungry, exhausted, his eyes blurred and aching under unshaded lamps, the prisoner becomes little more than a hounded animal. To the horrors the accused victim suffers from without must be added the horrors from within. He is pursued by the unsteadiness of his own mind, which cannot always produce the same answers to a repeated question. As a human being with a conscience, he is pursued by possible hidden guilt feelings, however pious he may have been, that undermine his rational awareness of innocence. The panic of the brainwashee is the total confusion he suffers about all concepts. His evaluations and norms are undermined. He cannot believe in anything objective anymore except in the dictated and indoctrinated logic of those who are more powerful than he. The enemy knows that, far below the surface, human life is built up of inner contradictions. He uses this knowledge to defeat and confuse the brainwashee. The continual shift of interrogators makes it ever more impossible to believe in consecutive thinking. Hardly has the victim adjusted himself to one inquisitor when he has to change his focus of alertness to another one. Yet this inner clash of norms and concepts, this inner contradiction of ideologies and beliefs is part of the philosophical sickness of our time. As a social being, the cardinal is pursued by the need for good human relationships and companionship. The constantly reiterated suggestion of his guilt urges him towards confession. As a suffering individual, he is blackmailed by an inner need to be left alone and undisturbed, if only for a few minutes. From within and without, he is inexorably driven toward signing the confession prepared by his persecutors. Why should he resist any longer? There are no visible witnesses to his heroism. He cannot prove his moral courage and rectitude after his death. The core of the strategy of menticide is the taking away of all hope, all anticipation, all belief in the future. It destroys the very elements which keep the mind alive. The victim is utterly alone. If the prisoner's mind proves too resistant, narcotics are given to confuse it. If his body collapses before his mind capitulates, he receives stimulants, all of which to help to preserve his consciousness until he confesses. Many of the narcotics and stimuli which ultimately help to induce mental dependency and enforce confusion can also create an amnesia, often a complete forgetting of the torture itself. The torture technique achieves the desired effect, but the victim forgets what has actually happened during the interrogation. The clinicians who do therapeutic work with amphetamine derivatives, which when injected into the bloodstream helps patients to remember long-forgotten experiences, are familiar with the drug's ability to bring soothing forgetfulness of the period during which the patient was drugged and questioned. Next, the victim is trained to accept his own confession, much as an animal is trained to perform tricks. False admissions are reared, repeated, hammered into his brain. He is forced to reproduce in his memory again and again the fantasized offenses, fictitious details, which ultimately convince him of his criminality. In the first stage, he is forced into mental submissiveness by others. In the second stage, he has entered a state of auto-hypnosis, convincing himself of fabricated crimes. According to Swift, the questions during the interrogation now dealt with the details of the cardinal's confession. First, his own statements were read to him, then statements of other prisoners accused of complicity with him, then elaborations of those statements. Sometimes the cardinal was morose, sometimes greatly disturbed and excited, but he answered all questions willingly, repeated all sentences once, twice, or even 3 times when he was told to do so. In the third and final phase of interrogation and menticide, the accused, now completely conditioned and accepting his own imposed guilt, is trained to bear false witness against himself and others. He doesn't have to convince himself any more through auto-hypnosis. He only speaks his master's voice. He is prepared for trial, softened completely. He becomes remorseful and willing to be sentenced. He is a baby in the hands of his inquisitors, fed as a baby and soothed by words as a baby. The inquisitor is treacherously kind and knows exactly what he wants. He wants the victim captured by the influence of a slowly induced hypnosis. He wants a well-documented confession. The inquisitor wants this confession in writing because it will make a convincing impression and will shock the world. A man will often try to hold out beyond the limits of his endurance because he continues to believe that his tormentors have some basic morality, that they will finally realize the enormity of their crimes and will leave him alone. This is a delusion. The only way to strengthen one's defenses against the organized attack on the mind and will is to understand better what the enemy is trying to do and to outwit him. If a prisoner accepted the doctrines, his life became easier, according to the man's stories. If a prisoner resisted the doctrines, the captors considered him a criminal and reactionary deserving of any brutalities. Time, fear, and continual pressure are known to create a menticidal hypnosis. The conscious part of the personality no longer takes part in the automatic confessions. The brainwashee lives in a trance, repeating the record grooved into him by somebody else. Fortunately, this too is known. As soon as the victim returns to normal circumstances, the panicky and hypnotic spell evaporates, and he again awakens into reality. It is now technically possible to bring the human mind into a condition of enslavement and submission. The Schwabel case and the cases of other prisoners of war are tragic examples of this, made even more tragic by our lack of understanding of the limits of heroism. We are just beginning to understand what these limits are and how they are used, both politically and psychologically, by the totalitarians. We have long since come to recognize the breast-beating confession and the public recantation as propaganda tricks. Now we are beginning to see ever more clearly how the totalitarians use menticide deliberately, openly, unashamedly as part of their official policy, as a means of consolidating and maintaining their power, though, of course, they give a different explanation to the whole procedure. It's all confessions of real and treacherous crimes. This brutal totalitarian technique has at least one virtue, however. It is obvious and unmistakable, and we are learning to be on our guard against it. But as we shall see later, there are other simpler forms of mental intervention. They can be just as dangerous as the direct assault, precisely because they are more subtle, and hence more difficult to detect. Often, we are not aware of their action at all. They influence the mind so slowly and indirectly that we may not even realize what they have done to us. The pressures of daily life impel more and more people to seek an easy escape from responsibility and maturity. Indeed, it is difficult to withstand these pressures. To many, the offer of a political panacea is very tempting. To others, the offer of escape through alcohol, drugs, and other artificial pleasures is irresistible. Free men in a free society must learn not only to recognize this steepy attack on mental integrity and fight it, but must learn also what there is inside man's mind that makes him vulnerable to this attack. What it is that makes him, in many cases, actually long for a way out of the responsibilities that Republican democracy and majority place on him.
There was a sentence that said, "He uses this knowledge to defeat and confuse the brainwashee." The continual shift of interrogators makes it ever more impossible to believe in consecutive thinking. Hardly has the victim adjusted himself to one inquisitor when he has to change his focus of alertness to another one. This is part of the method to the gang stalker's madness. A TI is always under attack by different people. So the TI who has been harassed all day may become tired and irritated, but the gang stalkers keep sending in a fresh supply of perps to continue the harassment. It's really sad. Let's review how gang stalkers can deceive the audience into groupthink in order to force compliance with their agenda.
Only blind wishful thinking can permit us to believe that our own society is free from the insidious influences mentioned in Part 1. The fact is that they exist all around us, both on a political and a non-political level, and they become as dangerous to the free way of life as are the oppressive totalitarian governments themselves. Every culture institutionalizes certain forms of behavior that communicate and encourage certain forms of thinking and acting, thus molding the character of its citizens. To the degree that the individual is made an object of constant mental manipulation, to the degree that cultural institutions may tend to weaken intellectual and spiritual strength, to the degree that knowledge of the mind is used to tame and condition people instead of educating them. To that degree does the culture itself produce men and women who are predisposed to accept an authoritarian way of life. The man who has no mind of his own can easily become the pawn of a would-be dictator. It is often disturbing to see how even intelligent people do not have straight-thinking minds of their own. The pattern of the mind, whether towards conformity and compliance or otherwise, is conditioned rather early in life. In his important social psychological experiments with students, Ash found out in simple tests that there was a yielding towards an erring majority opinion in more than a third of his test persons, and 75% of subjects experimented upon agreed with the majority in varying degrees. In many persons, the weight of authority is more important than the quality of the authority. If we are to learn to protect our mental integrity on all levels, we must examine not only the aspects of contemporary culture which have to do directly with the struggle for power, but also the developments in our culture which, by dulling the edge of our mental awareness or by taking advantage of our suggestibility, can lead us into the mental death or boredom of totalitarianism. Continual suggestion and slow hypnosis in the wake of mechanical mass communication promotes uniformity of the mind and may lure the public into the happy era of adjustment, integration, and equalization in which individual opinion is completely stereotyped. When I get up in the morning, I turn on my radio and hear the news and the weather forecast. Then comes the pontifical voice telling me to take aspirin for my headache. I have headaches occasionally, so does the world, and my headaches, like everyone else's, come from the many conflicts that life imposes on me. My radio tells me not to think about either the conflicts or the headaches. It suggests instead that I should retreat into that old magic action of swallowing a pill. Although I laugh as I listen to this long-distance prescription by a broadcaster who does not know anything about me or my headaches, and though I meditate for a moment on mad servility to the magic of chemistry, my hand has already begun to reach out for the aspirin bottle. After all, I do have a headache. It is extremely difficult to escape the mechanically repeated suggestions of everyday life. Even when our critical mind rejects them, they seduce us into doing what our intellect tells us is stupid. The mechanization of modern life has already influenced man to become more passive and to adjust himself to ready-made conformity. No longer does man think in personal values, following more his own conscience and ethical evaluations. He thinks more and more in the values brought to him by mass media. Headlines in the morning paper give him his temporary political outlook, and the radio blasts suggestions into his ears. Television keeps him in continual awe and passive fixation. Consciously, he may protest against these anonymous voices, but nevertheless, their suggestions ooze into his system. What is perhaps most shocking about these influences is that many of them have developed not out of man's destructiveness, but out of his hope to improve his world and to make life richer and deeper. The very institutions man has created to help himself, the very tools he has invented to enhance his life, the very progress he has made towards mastery of himself and his environment, all can become weapons of destruction. Pavlov made another significant discovery. The conditioned reflex could be developed most easily in a quiet laboratory with a minimum of disturbing stimuli. Every trainer of animals knows this from his own experience. Isolation and the patient repetition of stimuli are required to tame wild animals. Pavlov formulated his findings into a general rule in which the speed of learning is positively correlated with quiet and isolation. The totalitarians have followed this rule. They know that they can condition their political victims most quickly if they are kept in isolation. In the totalitarian technique of thought control, the same isolation applied to the individual is also applied to groups of people. In the Pavlovian strategy, terrorizing force can finally be replaced by a new organization of the means of communication. Ready-made opinions can be distributed day by day through press, radio, and so on, again and again, till they reach the nerve cell and implant a fixed pattern of thought in the brain. Consequently, guiding public opinion is the result, according to Pavlovian theoreticians, of good propaganda technique, and the polls a verification of the temporary successful action of the Pavlovian mechanisms on the mind. Yet the polls may only count what people pretend to think and believe, because it is dangerous for them to do otherwise. Such is the Pavlovian device. Repeat mechanically your assumptions and suggestions. Diminish the opportunity of communicating dissent and opposition. This is the simple formula for political conditioning of the masses. This is also the actual ideal of some of our public relation machines, who thus hope to manipulate the public into buying a special soap or voting for a special party. The Pavlovian strategy in public relations has people conditioned more and more to ask themselves, what do other people think? As a result, a delusion is created. People are incited to think what other people think, and thus public opinion may mushroom out into a mass prejudice. Expressed in psychoanalytical terms, through daily propagandistic noise backed up by forceful verbal cues, people can more and more be forced to identify with the powerful noisemaker. Big Brother's voice resounds in all the little brothers.
Groupthink is rampant among gang stalkers who then try to infect the audience and TIs with the group's delusions about who the TI is. The gang stalkers try to get the audience to engage in the campaign against the TI. It is imperative that the audience knows that the gang stalker's agenda is to destroy an innocent person. The audience shouldn't support or tolerate the perp's activities. It is important that the TIs realize that the perps are trying to force their own delusions on the TI by trying to change the TI's self-perception to match their own filthy fantasy. It's time for the audience and TIs to give gang stalkers a reality check.
So you're forced into a system of unwanted pursuit? Here's some survival tips.
Everyone being on the same page and having the same ideas isn't always a bad thing. This is necessary in big projects. Groupthink is a detrimental form of collaboration that usually forces agreement and neglects some members' input in favor of outcomes that only one or a minority of the group prefers. Groupthink shows itself at work through cliques. Here are some tips for managers on office cliques. The following comes from How to Deal with Cliques at Work by Tia Benjamin.
When thinking of cliques, high school comes to mind, but cliques don't get left behind at graduation. They must be navigated in the workplace as well. Cliques can prove extremely destructive to the working environment. In the book, The Sociocultural Foundation of Human Movement, David Kirk and his fellow authors state that cliques customarily work against team goals. Noting in team sports, athletes have been observed to pass the ball more often to teammates they like, even when another, less popular teammate is in a better position. Managers must deal successfully with cliques to ensure a cohesive workplace. Instructions on how to deal with cliques at work. 1. Identify if any cliques exist in the workplace or if any could be perceived. In agencies with multiple family members, these individuals may be perceived as forming the basis for a clique, even if this is not accurate. The same is true when other personal ties exist between co-workers and for groups who lunch together and attend functions such as happy hour outside of work. 2. Review your own behaviors. Consider if you are seen as being part of an existing clique or if you actively participate in clique activities or socializing. For managers who have been promoted from within the company, assess if you've done enough to separate yourself from cliques you previously belonged to. 3. Treat everyone fairly. Avoid favoritism and inconsistency and promote people based on competency. Don't allow some individuals to get away with behaviors, tardiness or insubordination, for example, while others are disciplined for the same behavior. 4. Do not recognize the clique as a unit or allow anyone to speak on behalf of the group. Treat each employee as an individual with his own opinion and perspective on the issue at hand. If you assign group tasks or work in teams, avoid allowing the clique to be a work group. Instead, divide the members across multiple groups. 5. Stay focused on the work task and ensure your employees do the same. Prevent opportunities for cliquish behavior to foster by keeping the workplace busy and avoiding excessive downtime. Tips and warnings. Lead by example. Model professional behavior and don't participate in clique activities. Workers can feel left out if some occasions, birthdays and baby showers for example, are celebrated for certain employees and not others. Although a manager cannot control what happens outside work, develop a consistent company approach for celebrating events at work by establishing a company-sponsored social committee.
It is important for managers or supervisors to avoid being part of a clique or being under the influence of cliques. Gang stalkers usually form cliques and encourage groupthink. This makes it hard for a non-gang stalker member of the clique to back out if the gang stalkers suggest office mobbing activities against a TI. If a non-gang stalker manager, supervisor, or boss is part of the clique, she or he may have difficulty refraining from the office mob without having issues with the clique and risk becoming a target for not supporting the mob. These cliques are usually not just for fun or hanging out. There are obligations for the group members, which include having each other's back, and this means even if a member does something that is wrong. Here's more information on office cliques. The following comes from Tribal Warfare, Dealing with Cliques in the Workplace by Admin.
The opportunity. Delivering a high-quality, unique product or service to the marketplace sometimes takes a lot of people. Whether you work for a small company or a large one, most of us work with a lot of different kinds of people on a daily basis. Co-workers, customers, suppliers, government regulators, and many others. In almost every human situation, likes and dislikes, alliances and exclusions start manifesting themselves. You may find yourself dealing with unseen barriers between groups that are reluctant to help one another, don't share information, and sometimes even actively hinder another person or group's success. Cliques can be based on tenure, profession, social or economic class, race or ethnicity, gender, or any other factor that differentiates people from one another. I've seen workplaces with a clique of smokers versus non-smokers, cliques of coffee drinkers versus non-coffee drinkers, and Friends Watchers, a popular TV show, versus non-Friends Watchers. We all enjoy the camaraderie of people we share an interest or characteristic with, but when cliques become too exclusive or destructive to those outside the group, the company suffers. Crucial information is miscommunicated or omitted. Deadlines are missed, equipment is hoarded, and employees will sit idle rather than help someone from outside the group. Morale suffers and turnover increases. All of this is not just wasteful and unpleasant, it is also expensive and potentially lethal if not dealt with. The solution: you can reduce the harmful effects of all types of cliquishness by changing the environment. In some specific cases, it may also be necessary to analyze the nature of the exclusiveness and address them directly with the groups involved. The first step is usually to figure out the nature and extent of the problem. Cliques in general. People tending to associate with people that have similarities is usually a positive thing. Having a company softball team, for example, is a camaraderie and shared interest that is usually positive and helpful. The people involved share a bond that makes them more comfortable at work because they know each other from another context. Cliques can become guarded and hostile to outsiders, particularly in environments where clique members band together against what they perceive as a threat. The popular reality-based show Survivor contains good examples of harmful cliques as participants form alliances and tribes devoted to preserving one another's interests and systematically voting non-clique members off the island. In William Golding's novel, Lord of the Flies, a group of British schoolboys stranded on an island form alliances around two separate leaders. Ralph, who is a rules-based, logical person concerned with practical matters of survival, and Jack, who is more interested in hunting and having fun. As the boys align themselves with the leader that most closely represents their own leanings and philosophies, they become more and more savage to one another, to the extent of killing members of the other group. Although in a business environment, the behaviors and damage are much more subtle, the themes are similar. Cliques should become a concern only when there are negative consequences for people outside the group. Warning signs. Signs of harmful clique behavior include critical business decisions taking place without appropriate input from people that are not part of the group. Complaints that you can't get ahead in the company unless you are part of the group. Information or equipment being shared freely among the group, but not to outsiders. Group members getting noticeably different racial promotions, incentive, bonuses, and other perks than the rest of the company. Group members are getting a noticeably different ratio of disciplinary actions, write-ups, or complaints than the rest of the company. Tenure cliques. Tenure cliques are very common, especially in older companies that are undergoing organizational change or adapting to new market forces and technologies. In these cases, you have a population of employees that have been with the company for a long time, and who have been trusted with functions or information that they perceive that trust is being eroded or taken away by having to share it with people who are automating certain functions that used to be done by a person, or restructuring a department in a way that gives a person less control over the process or outcome than he may have had in the past. The old-timers may band together against what they see as a threat to their value to the company. They may subtly or blatantly oppose new technology, new processes, and seek to undermine the efforts of anyone new to the company or suggesting new methods or ideas. Professional cliques. Professional cliques are also very common. In healthcare, you have the physicians versus the nursing staff. In law enforcement, you have street cops versus investigators. In academia, you have tenured versus non-tenured staff. In manufacturing, you have management versus labor. This results from people with different knowledge and skill sets and people who perceive themselves as having invested more in their careers than others. More skilled or more educated people feel like they have paid their dues and should have more influence in decisions than people who are less specialized or who have invested less in the profession. Economic/social cliques. Classism exists in almost every society. There is the upper class versus those who are middle or lower class. People go to great extremes to be included in the upper class. They subtly or not so subtly display cars, houses, and clothes to prove membership in the elite upper class. Time magazine recently ran an article indicating that the most fashionable status symbol among the new rich is to have a charitable foundation named after them. Business has long, rich tradition of being the domain of the upper class. Business meetings are held aboard yachts, over champagne and caviar. Important decisions are made at expensive resorts, over a round of golf or skiing. Having money is often seen as a self-evident credential of being a good business person or decision maker. Addressing problem cliquishness. Now that you've determined that a clique problem exists, and now that you know something about the nature and extent of the problem, what can you do to contain the problem and prevent negative consequences? Find causes of anxiety and address them. People act defensively and form defensive alliances when they feel threatened. Groups that are facing uncertainty are especially prone to negative clique behavior. In the case of tenure-based cliques, for example, you may want to make it a point to emphasize the importance of the older employees, seek out their opinion, and ensure they feel included in new and ongoing events. Recognize the need for a variety of people and skills as vital to everyone's success. When you have a specific problem to solve, appoint a task force of people from inside and outside the clique. For example, to define requirements for remodeling part of a call center, include management and customer service reps on the task force. The reps will have suggestions for the productivity and enjoyment of the largest part of your population. The management folks will have the information on business objectives and cost. By collaborating, they will come up with a better design than management could working in a vacuum. Be aware that this will take longer than the management team would alone, but the results will be worth it in the quality of the design and benefits to morale. Publicly and specifically recognize the value of all employees. Use existing institutions like an Employee of the Month program or nominations for bonuses to recognize people who may be outside the group, and use specific examples of how their actions have helped add to the bottom line. For example, nominating a member of the clerical staff and emphasizing how that person's efficiency and cooperation ensure that physicians have accurate and complete information will show how that person is of value to people in the clique. This draws the attention of the physicians to how much influence a person outside their group can have on their success if everyone works together. Clarify roles in ways that emphasize synergy and cooperation. Having groups participate in drafting service level agreements and other items will open a discussion of what people need from one another and generally brings a better understanding of one another's roles. People in clerical jobs often complain that management doesn't have any idea how complicated and difficult it is to produce certain reports. By discussing this in terms of a service level agreement, this gives the clerical staff an opening to define what they need in order to do the job properly and on time. They may need information sooner from the sources they collected from, or may need some training on the software they use. Consider the performance review process. Are people's performance reviews based solely on the opinions of people within their own group? Does their performance affect other groups? Some companies have what they call 360-degree reviews, meaning that an employee is evaluated from all the way around his sphere of influence. Ratings are collected from their team members, business partners, and sometimes even customers. By expanding the view of an employee's performance, they realize that they have more than just one group of people to please in order to be considered successful. Ensure disciplinary actions are equitable. Discriminating in the way that rules and policies are enforced often leads to ill will between groups. If you allow the computer programmers to get away with violating the company dress code, but crack down on the mailroom staff, there will probably be grumbling in the least, and it wouldn't be a surprise if the programmers are finding their mail misrouted. If there are reasons for the difference, for example, if groups that have more customer contact have a different dress code than backroom personnel, be sure to explain the reason clearly. Better yet, involve the employees in defining the dress code, making sure that they understand the business objectives. Conclusion. Depending on how entrenched the clique culture is and how much influence you have on the environment and individuals involved, you may have a long, protracted battle on your hands to make your workplace as open, productive, and objective as you'd like. It's been our experience, though, that anyone in the company who uses any one of these suggestions will improve the situation at least a little bit and at least temporarily. Changing the situation permanently will take persistence and a more concerted effort.
That was a good overview of the types of cliques that may develop and why. It is harmful for the company to have an intense internal competition or rivalry. The groups or cliques that get together usually get distracted from the actual work and instead plan ways to outdo their rivals. When the focus becomes winning instead of delivering superior products, services, information, projects, or work, then cheating, shortcuts, and sabotage are more likely to occur. The benefits of winning are then mainly for the small group that wins, not the entire workplace. In the end, the whole company loses in more ways than one. A diversity of meaningful opinions and ideas is usually good for companies, so a wise company would avoid groupthink and seek to foster healthy collaborations. Luckily, bad office cliques can be dissolved, and the tips should help in finding ways that suit a specific work environment. Try it and send your feedback to protectlifenow@yahoo.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats and turn off or mute your cell phones, pagers, and beepers. The show is about to begin.
This street theater comes from Syracuse, New York.
So I was out shopping and visited the small store. I asked where to find a certain item, but the owner decided to give me personalized service after checking a text message on his phone. He was probably in his mid-50s and seemed okay. He quickly gave one of the prompts, but it was so quick I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt and not label him a perp. He led me to the item, which was weird because usually they just point to the location and let the customers find it on their own. I took it all in stride until, while talking, he gave another prompt, this time in a way that left no doubt he was a perp. There was a moment of silence while he waited for my reaction. I didn't do anything, so he stalled a bit. I just got so sick of him and told him that if he was going to be a perp, then he was going to lose customers. I told him to rot in hell and walked out calmly. Don't worry, I didn't cause a scene, lose control, or anything like that. Just said what I had to say. I mean, really, was he in business to make money or to gang stalk? My money is the same as other customers, but he won't be getting it anymore. If he was going to choose customers, then he wasn't choosing wisely. Do these perps know each other? Are they aware of the types of lowlives they are associating themselves with? When I had to deal with gang stalkers while shopping at big-name stores, I felt sorry for the companies who lost customers because the perps were picking and choosing customers. But this guy was ruining his own business. He would rather chase out an honest paying customer and encourage other perps to shop Lyft at his store. Yeah, that's right. There's no honor among thieves. These perps have no character or integrity. They're shady as hell and have no problem stealing from others. It's funny because the next day I was traveling and some perps were sitting nearby. In their usual desperate attempt for my attention, they decided to have a loud conversation. Listen, I couldn't care less about what is going on in their lives. Anyone who says TIs are just trying to get attention need to see some of these perps. Definitely not the kind of people whose attention is worth having. If they weren't trying to ruin my life, I would not have given them a second glance. Maybe that's why they're mad. They have to force people to give them attention. Well, back to what happened. There were some college-age kids in their 20s, maybe early to mid-20s, 2 guys and a girl. One guy looked like your average clean-cut college kid, but he also looked like he was on something. The other guy looked like a frumpy nerd, while his girlfriend looked all kinds of cheap. So the clean-cut weirdo starts bragging about how he was arrested for drugs several times and steals shirts when he goes shopping with his mom. He gave a whole lesson to the other 2 on how to steal shirts from stores. His method was to buy 1 or 2 shirts, then steal 4 and use his mom as a decoy. He said something like, no one thinks a kid shopping with his mom will steal clothes, especially when she's buying stuff. Ridiculous. So then, I thought about the store owner and wondered, what happens if perps steal from other perps? Would the different units try to stalk each other? It's ridiculous. So, You got this store owner who decides to choose customers, then doesn't even know how to choose them right. And then there's the clean-cut weirdo shoplifter who brags about stealing and instructs others on how to do it. How ironic. On one hand of this gang-stalking network, there is a petty store owner, and on the other hand, there is a petty thief.
Now it's time for TI News. I'm always looking for news stories about stalking, especially gang stalking. So if you find a news story that appeared in an official news source, please email it to protectlifenow@yahoo.com. So here's the news for today. The following comes from Man Jailed After Harassing Elderly Neighbors by Whistling Addams Family Theme Each Time He Saw Them by Daily Mail Reporter. A nuisance neighbor who taunted an elderly couple by whistling the theme from the Addams Family whenever he saw them has been jailed. The defendant harassed the pensioners for more than 4 years, making them feel like prisoners in their home. His victims, Michael and Kathleen Sharp, said the defendant had nearly succeeded in destroying their lives. The defendant, 51, had been handed an anti-social behavior order last December for harassing the couple. But a court heard his nuisance behavior, which had already lasted 4 years, continued on the day the order was imposed. The court was shown CCTV footage from the cameras on the Sharps' property, which picked up the defendant's repeated whistling when they arrived or left the house. The prosecutor said each incident taken in isolation would probably seem silly or almost pathetic. But, he added, if something happens on an ongoing basis and goes on and on and on, eventually it reaches the stage of being absolutely intolerable. Mr. Sharp from Wingerworth in Derbyshire told the court the defendant's behavior had made his wife ill and she had started losing her hair. It's been devastating and it's done what he wanted to do, to try to destroy our lives, the 68-year-old said. He very nearly succeeded. His wife told magistrates that they could not leave the house without the defendant being there. The 66-year-old added, "He frightens me. I've not been able to live a normal life. I was a prisoner in my own home." The defendant denied breaching the ASBO and 2 other counts of harassment, including watching the couple and their family and whistling the theme from the 1960s horror comedy. But he was found guilty by magistrates and sentenced to 20 weeks in prison. The defendant's attorney told Chesterfield Magistrates Court her client disputed he was the perpetrator of all the whistling and said his whistles were directed at his dog, not the Sharp family. The defendant told the court, "I couldn't care less what they do. It's of no interest to me at all." But the chairman of the magistrates bench said the defendant's version of events was not credible. Passing sentence, he said, "You pursued a course of conduct that caused great distress to the Sharp family and have shown no recognition of the impact on that family." Speaking after the defendant was sentenced, Ms. Sharp said, "I'm so relieved. It's been an absolute nightmare. It's affected our health and all the family." This event is so close to what TI's experience with some neighbors. Whistling is one of the prompts used in some campaigns. The article mentioned that each incident taken in isolation would probably seem silly or almost pathetic. A TI reporting the incident of whistling would be told to ignore it, especially if it's coming from random people, and that's what the perps want. Ironically, this silliness and pathetic nature of the prompt is what causes TIs to not take the whole thing seriously until it's too late. Unfortunately, it's also what's stopping the audience from taking the TI's claim seriously. Hopefully, it won't be too late before the real danger becomes obvious. The article goes on to say, if something happens on an ongoing basis and goes on and on and on, eventually it reaches the stage of being absolutely intolerable. The Sharps started started to experience health problems and were afraid to leave their home. Same with TIs. The gang stalkers know fully well that their silly and pathetic antics, repeated over and over again, can cause physical and psychological issues for the TI. Now take what happened to the Sharp family and magnify it to 24/7 harassment, not just only when they leave the house, but even when they are in their homes. In addition, instead of it being just one neighbor, make it many neighbors. In fact, add strangers doing the same thing wherever they go. Yeah, that's the horror called gang stalking. Miss Sharp said, "I've not been able to live a normal life. I was a prisoner in my own home." TIs face discrimination by members of this network who are littered all over the place. TIs' human rights and rights to privacy are being violated. Overall, their lives have been invaded and stolen from them. Every day and every night, TIs are fighting for their minds, health, and lives. If the TI has children, they also have to fight for their kids' minds, health, and lives. One TI mentioned that her teenage son was beat up by an adult gang stalker because she was going to testify about the gang stalker's campaign against her. That's the torment TIs face on a daily and nightly basis. The first thought is, how could anyone or any group of people do this to someone whom they don't know and who has never done anything to them? The defendant denied his actions and even said, "I couldn't care less what they do. It's of no interest to me at all." But they showed him doing it, and that's what these gang stalkers are like also. The defendant is a good example of some of the people that TIs have to deal with. They go out of their way to destroy someone's life for whatever reason, then they deny ever doing it. The Sharps' ordeal lasted 4 years. Some campaigns last longer than that. Luckily for the Sharps, law enforcement took their claims seriously and they helped themselves by gathering evidence. TIs must do the same and stay vigilant. Change is going to come. The following comes from Cell Phone Stalkers Harass Washington Family by Brittany Bacon and Scott Michaels. Who do you call when your personal cell phone has been turned into a spying device, tracking your family's every move and giving an anonymous stalker a view into your private life? 3 Washington state families say it happened to them and left them feeling like they were living in a horror movie. "They say you're going to die, we hate you, we're going to murder you," said Heather Klukendow, one of the alleged victims. And the families say no one seems to have an answer as to how or why it happened. The police say that they are stumped, but they have not ruled out the possibility that the alleged victims are making the whole thing up. The families say the calls come in at all hours of the night, threatening to kill their children, their pets, and grandparents. Voicemails arrive, playing recordings of their private conversation, including one with a local police detective. The caller knows, the family says, what they're wearing and what they're doing, and after months of investigating, police seem powerless to stop them. Cell phone companies are skeptical. "We are unaware of any technology that would allow the activity that's being reported here," said a Sprint spokesman. "We are partnering with law enforcement to investigate. We're not exactly sure what's being done to these phones." But in an age of rapidly advancing technology, some surveillance experts told ABC News it's all too easy for hackers to turn your cell phones against you. An electronic surveillance expert told ABC News cell phones can be operated remotely. You can take photographs remotely. You can track the person's position. You can figure out where the phone is, said the electronic surveillance experts. Most cops have no idea how this is done. Harassment or prank. The Kuykendall family's troubles started in February when 16-year-old Courtney Kuykendall's cell phone started sending text messages to her friends by itself, the family said. Then the threats came. A scratchy voice called daily, sometimes to say that the entire family's throats would be slit, Courtney's mother, Heather, told ABC News. But when the Faircrest, Washington police tried to find the culprit, the calls were traced back to the Kuykendall's own phones, even when they were turned off. It got worse. The Kuykendells and 2 other Faircrest families told ABC News that they believe the callers are using their cell phones to spy on them. They say the hackers know their every move, where they are, what they're doing, and what they're wearing. The callers have recorded private conversations, the families and police said, including a meeting with a local detective. Many of the voicemails sound like a teenager's prank. Sometimes they say real, juvenile things. Sometimes it's really scary, Kuykendall said. In one of the messages which Kuykendall played for ABC News, the caller said, "I know who you are. I know where you live. I'm going to kill you." Kuykendall, her sister Darcy Price, and her neighbor Andrea McKay, who also claimed to be victims of similar harassment, have named the callers restricted, the name that pops up when the calls come in. Kuykendall, Price, and McKay say their families' phones have turned on by themselves when they were switched off. The ringtones have changed on their own. The callers seem to know when the kids leave for school and when they are home alone, Kuykendall said. Messages warned the McKays that there would be a shooting at their daughter's school. The harassment, they said, feels relentless. Kuykendall installed a new security system for the house. Soon after, she got a voicemail from Restricted saying that the callers knew her security code. Once McKay said when she was slicing limes in her kitchen, a call came in from Restricted. The voice said it preferred lemons. As soon as the Kuykendall family met with police, they say they received warnings not to talk to the cops. Then a voicemail arrived, a recording of the conversation they'd just had with the police. The level of fear went from "this is a pain" to an uncontrolled fear and anxiety level, said McKay. Kuykendall said her family switched phones and opened new accounts twice, but the calls keep coming. "If we go a day without a call, that's a good day," Kuykendall said. The callers have likely violated several laws, law experts say, possibly including federal wiretapping statutes. But the case has local law enforcement stumped. "We're almost dumbfounded. We've never seen anything like this," said the Faircrest police chief, who said he has known the Kuykendells for years. The Faircrest police chief said he is working with the Tacoma Police and the Pierce County Sheriff's Department and has also contacted officials at the Department of Homeland Security, but police still are not close to finding the perpetrators. Most of the harassment appears directed at Courtney Kuykendall, police said, adding that most, but not all, of the calls have been traced back to her phone. Police are not calling the 16-year-old a suspect, though the unusual tale has raised some eyebrows. "It wouldn't be prudent not to look internally at the family," said a Pierce County Sheriff's Department detective. "At this point, we aren't saying it's someone inside the family, but it's someone that is close enough to them to know this much about them," he said. "It seems like it's someone who is tied into the group, a family member, a friend, or an enemy." He added, "I hope it isn't coming from within the family because it would be a waste of everyone's time." Heather Kuykendall is adamant that her daughter is not involved and said the calls kept coming even when they took Courtney's phone away. She said Courtney was too upset to speak to ABC News. "We know it's not her," Kuykendall said of Courtney, "and we can't think of anybody we've made mad or if we've made any enemies." TIs have reported phone taps and computer hacking and other technological harassment or bullying. One TI created a program for the web, and the following day after it was uploaded to the web, a gang stalker said, "All that work and no one is going to see it." So, it's possible that the TI's internet activities are tampered, hampered, and monitored. Protect Life Now has noticed issues with emails. The response rate to some things are usually low and leaves one to wonder if emails are getting maliciously filtered. What the Kuykendalls have experienced in the total invasion of their privacy and a sort of voyeurism is common among TIs. The TIs face the same amount of doubt and disbelief that this family faced in the beginning when trying to report what is happening to them. Luckily, the police started taking the family's claims seriously and conducted investigations. The report said that most of the illegal surveillance was done through the cell phone. This is probably one of the ways that TI's surveillance is also taking place. The following comes from Murdoch Settles Suit by Dozens of Victims of Hacking by Sarah Lyle and Ravi Samaya. Rupert Murdoch's media empire has agreed to pay substantial damages to several dozen high-profile victims of phone and email hacking, and lawyers for those victims said Thursday that they had seen documents showing that senior managers not only knew about the hacking, but also lied about it and destroyed evidence as part of a cover-up. The High Court hearing on Thursday, at which the settlements were detailed, was a humiliating occasion for Mr. Murdoch's news group newspapers, which published the now defunct tabloid at the heart of the hacking scandal, the News of the World. In a courtroom so jammed with lawyers, victims, and members of the news media that some people had to sit on the floor, News Group's lawyer repeatedly expressed the company's sincere apologies for the damages as well as the distress caused to victim after victim. The list of 37 victims settling with the company included politicians, celebrities, actors, and sports figures, as well as people in their inner circles, employees, spouses, lovers. It is unclear how much News Group will end up having to pay after all the cases are finally settled, but the total bill for the 18 victims whose settlement details were disclosed Thursday reaches well above $1 million. According to the police, there may be as many as 800 victims. Perhaps 24 suits are pending. News Group says it is eager to settle all the cases, but it was not clear during extensive discussions in court that it was able to placate all those who had bought claims. In each case, News Group also agreed to pay the complainant's legal costs, any of which could easily have run into 6 figures. One complainant, speaking on the condition on anonymity, said that his came to more than $300,000, an amount that does not include News International's fees. But perhaps more damaging to the company than the financial penalties was a statement from lawyers for the hacking victims. News Group has agreed to compensation being assessed on the basis that senior employees and directors of NGN knew about the wrongdoing and sought to conceal it by deliberately deceiving investigators and destroying evidence, the statement said, referring to News Group's newspapers. The lawyers also said they had obtained, through 9 disclosure orders from the court, documents relating to the nature and scale of the conspiracy, a cover-up, and the destruction of evidence email archives by News Group. In a statement, News International, the British newspaper arm of Mr. Murdoch's global empire and the parent company of News Group, said it had made no admission as part of these statements that directors or senior employees knew about the wrongdoing by NGN or sought to conceal it. It added, however, for the purpose of reaching these settlements only, NGN agreed that the damages to be paid to claimants should be assessed as if this was the case. Lawyers said, however, that it was unlikely that the company would have agreed to calculate settlements on the basis that there was a cover-up if there were, in fact, no cover-up. Until the end of 2010, News International denied that the News of the World engaged in phone hacking and vehemently vowed to fight any legal claims. After After that, it admitted that some of its reporters and editors knew about the hacking. Now it has acknowledged that hacking was pervasive, and with hundreds of potential victims still left to deal with, it recently set up a web page where people who believe their phones were hacked can file claims electronically. More than 20 people have been arrested on suspicion of phone hacking or illegally paying the police for information. No criminal charges have been filed yet. A professor of communication at the University of Westminster said in a statement that the latest disclosures represented a devastating indictment not only of the corrupt journalistic practice at the News of the World, but of the calculated cover-up which apparently followed. The cases also extended beyond the one newspaper. Mr. Law said he had been hacked not only by the News of the World, but also by The Sun, another Murdoch tabloid. The hearing took on an almost ritualistic tone as each victim's statements, its wording carefully vetted and approved by a news group, was read out to the court. Each reading was immediately followed by the lawyer's confirmation of the victim's account and a statement that the company acknowledged that the information should have never been obtained or used in this manner. News Group also admitted outright for the first time that it had hacked into an email account in pursuit of a story. The lawyer confirmed the account of the son of a notorious British serial killer that the News of the World had unlawfully obtained the confidential access to details to the claimant's email's account, including his password, and had accessed his inbox. The victim's statement had similar narrative arcs. At some point in the early mid-2000s, most said they had become suspicious about personal information that was appearing in the News of the World. Some said they had experienced odd problems with their voicemail, like being unable to gain access to it because it was busy. Then the victim said they were shown evidence by the police of what the News of the World had done. Mr. Law's statement said the police had played him messages he had left for his children's nanny 5 years earlier. The statements detail the victim's distress and confusion. Although the articles would often only contain a small piece of accurate information, said the lawyer for Mr. Law's ex-wife, it was enough for his client to suspect everyone close to her and for the claimant and Mr. Law to suspect each other. The private investigator who worked for the News of the World was News Group's co-defendant in the lawsuits. But his lawyer said his client, who was jailed for phone hacking in 2007 and faces new criminal charges, had not admitted to wrongdoing. Even for some of those who had settled, the matter was not over. This is still only Act 4, Scene 4 of a 5-act play, said a member of Parliament who was awarded about $46,000 after his phone was hacked. A lawyer representing a number of victims said that it was their perseverance, even when News Group was aggressively denying that it had ever hacked anyone, that had led to the settlement. It is a credit to them, the claimants, that they kept on, she said, because we have now discovered a massive conspiracy involving criminal activity and a cover-up. TIs are going through a similar ordeal where their privacy is violated and their personal information is made public. It's said that the hacking was aggressively denied, but the claimants did not allow themselves to be browbeaten. There's also an aggressive denial by the perps that gang stalking exists or that they are engaging in it, all of course while they are doing it. But the truth always comes out. For a wealthy, powerful, and influential media empire to be brought to justice on a crime that was hard to prove should give hope to TIs. The last sentence is so important and can apply to TIs. It said, "It is a credit to them, the claimants, that they kept on," she said, "because we have now discovered a massive conspiracy involving criminal activity and a cover-up." that's it for this episode. If you would like to share your stalking story with Tenani, please check out the Protect Life Now's organized harassment video on YouTube. You can also email protectlifenow@yahoo.com for more information. If any gang stalkers disagree with the information presented, please let us know. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.